Good morning and welcome to day 2 of the 2012 Vienna seminar. This morning's session, number 4, we will be looking at the consequences of the uprising for regional security in the Middle East. I'm glad to introduce Ambassador Friedrich Stift, Head of the Department for Near and Middle East at the Austrian Federal Ministry for European and International Affairs. Prior to his current position, he served as Austrian's ambassador to Saudi Arabia, and he has a wide area of expertise on regional and international relations of the Middle East, as well on issues of political development and democratization in the Arab world. Ambassador Stift, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very honored and pleased that I was invited to chair session 4 on the uprisings and the peace process. I'm very delighted that I can introduce 3 very distinguished speakers. To my right is Dr. Nabil Shat. I think he's known to everybody of you. He's one of the most well-known Palestinian politicians. He has a PhD in law and economics. He was a political advisor to Yasser Arafat in the 70s. He was participating at peace negotiations, Middle East peace negotiations in Wye River, Taba, Camp David, Annapolis. He was at the conferences of Madrid. He was in Oslo. Later on, he was Minister for International Cooperation and Development, Foreign Minister, and Deputy Prime Minister. He is also a member of the Palestinian National Council and a member of the Revolutionary Council of Fatah. Welcome. To my left is the new Special Representative of the European Union for the Middle East Peace Process, Dr. Andreas Reinicke. Prior to his function, which he took over on 1st of February 2012, he was the German ambassador to Syria. He has great knowledge of the Middle East, as he served in Tel Aviv and also in Ramallah. And in between, he was also the Middle East director in the German Foreign Ministry. Welcome. And to the right, to further right, is Dr. Ben Segenreich, known to all Austrians. He's since 1989 Middle East correspondent of the Austrian Public Radio and TV Broadcasting, ORF. He lives in Israel since 1983. He has a PhD in physics. He studied mathematics and physics in Vienna and Paris, and he is also an expert on Israeli politics. I served almost 9 years in Saudi Arabia, and the political narrative was that the foremost problem the Arab world faces is the unresolved Middle East problem, namely the Palestine issue. It was said that if this issue is solved, all other issues in the region will be solved almost instantly. When the Arab Spring started, it was interesting to observe, it yesterday already was remarked, that the Palestine issue as such did not play a prominent role, and neither other foreign policy considerations. It was rather problems of unemployment, bad governance, lack of political participation, etc., which worried people and which made them go to the streets. The only one actually who challenged this Arab narrative on the, one and foremost problem was actually the neocons and President George W. Bush with his broader Middle East and North Africa initiative. He told the leaders of the Arab world that they have to reform politically, economically, that they have to open their closed political systems, while at the same time recognizing that the Palestine issue has to be solved. I remember that the Arab leaders were very upset. They said, the US should rather care about solving the Middle East issue, the Palestine issue, and not meddle into their internal affairs. In the past 8 months, we have seen elections in the Arab world. It was interesting to see that the elections were carried, got most of the votes, by parties affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood, be it in Egypt, be it in Tunisia, and in Morocco. And I would say the precursor of the Arab Spring and the first elections won by parties of the Muslim Brotherhood was in 2006 when Hamas won the elections in Palestine. Dr. Shat, just one question. Do you agree that this was somehow a precursor of the Arab Spring when Hamas won the elections, or is it an exaggeration?
Well, it's one of the signals. I think it was basically our failure, the failure of Fatah and the Palestinian National Social Democratic Movement. It was a failure of preparation, a failure of discipline, possibly even a failure of predicting that the peace process will not fail, will not succeed. We bet on the success of the peace process, and Hamas bet on the failure of the peace process. And therefore, it's not only a question of pre-Islamic, post-Islamic uprising. It was really, in my mind, much closer to home and to the problems we faced in making the peace process work. But obviously, Hamas received the support of the Islamist militant revolution all around, particularly from Iran. There's no doubt about it.
Thank you. And another question, how will the Arab Spring change the dynamics of the peace process? Is the first question. And the second is, how will it affect the inter-Palestinian relations between Hamas and Fatah?
Well, that's a long story. That's a much longer story. I think the Arab uprising is the single most important political event in the modern history of the Arab world. And I made the simile yesterday with Latin America, and I think that the post-colonial period, which brought military dictatorships in the Arab world, as it did in Latin America. It also, after Bolivar and after the liberation, military dictatorships came in to fill the gap. That's what happened in the Arab world. And then there was the collapse of the Soviet Union, which was the supporter of the Arab regimes at the time, at least vis-a-vis American and Western domination. And it produced some stability for the existence of the Soviet Union, produced some stability in the area. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, produced two important things: the rise of militant Islam and the attempt at reaching an Israeli-Palestinian peace process through peaceful negotiations. And I think we are post these two eras. I think the Arab uprising is a post-militant Islamic phenomenon. And I think it witnesses a serious change in the direction of political Islam. The militant side of political Islam has been in effect defeated. And that is Al-Qaeda, Taliban, and to some extent the Iranian model of political Islam. I mean, the rise today is of a political Islam that is on a trek from Tehran to Istanbul. And I think what we are seeing here is that an uprising that somebody mentioned yesterday that was not initiated by the Islamic movement. It was initiated by social democrats and liberals in a quest for freedom, in a quest for dignity, above all, and a quest also for, of course, employment and economic benefit. It was caught by the political Islamic movement because it was the only organized movement. But I think within a year's time, we can see two very important changes. Political Islam is changing, but also liberal and social democratic parties are forming. And maybe Tunisia will give the model of some form of a unity between moderate political Islamists and liberals and social democrats in a union that I think we are seeing the beginning of its real development in Egypt, which is the center of the Arab world. And therefore, what we are seeing today is a totally different political Islam from the political Islam that rose as a result of the collapse of the Soviet Union, as a result of the American follies in Afghanistan and Iraq, which strengthened Iran and made it a center of power, and which, with the rise of Taliban and Al-Qaeda, produced 9/11 and the major East-West confrontation, producing Mr. Bush and his new Middle East. All of this, we are over that. We are going beyond that. And I think it's going to be favorable to unity. I mean, what happened temporarily is that the Arab Spring hit both Damascus and Cairo. Hitting Damascus made Mr. Mish'al lose his base in Syria and become a political refugee like Arafat was for a long time. And I think it pushed Mr. Mish'al towards moderation. But the Arab Spring in Egypt produced hope for the Hamas in Gaza that maybe there will be an Islamic government in Egypt that will support them against their brothers in the West Bank, which is stupid, I think. I don't think there's any Egyptian party, Islamist, non-Islamist, social democrat, or liberal that will support separation in the Palestinian ranks. But that, I think, was part of the bet of the Hamas in Gaza. It produced the single most important internal election within Hamas that took 2 months. And obviously, the liberals have won. And I think the first sign of that is the reactivation of the unity agreement between Hamas and leading where? Leading to elections. In other words, what the Islamists have won in Tunisia and in Egypt, and what the Islamists see they cannot continue winning unless they really moderate and unite with the other forces, is also happening in Palestine. And I think if the unity in Palestine, supported by the Islamist forces, the moderate Islamist forces in the Arab world. I was in Tunisia and I met the Nahda leadership. And my first question was the following. I have been defending political Islam all over the West by saying that political Islam is moving from Tehran to Istanbul. Do you agree with my analysis? And he said, yes. So I said, where have you arrived? And he said, in Istanbul. All right? Where do you stand on Hamas-Fatah unity? Full support for that unity. Full support. We will join with our brothers in Egypt and at other places to put all the pressure to get Hamas to move on to the unity within the political understanding of Abu Mazen of non-violent struggle and a serious attempt at a two-state solution. And I'm talking about Islamists. I'm not talking about. And therefore, I think I don't want to be over-optimistic. I know things take time. I know it took, 25 years after 1840 in Europe. It took some 20 years before things stabilized in Eastern Europe. It took about 25 years for Latin America. I hope it will take less in the Arab world, particularly in Egypt. As I said yesterday, there is a very fast learning curve that the Egyptians are going. And the two things are going at the same time, and I think that is going to happen in Palestine. If we have elections in 6 months, and I bet the secular forces will win, and if the secular forces of Palestine, Fatah, and its allies win the elections, but proceed from that win to a national unity government, because there is no way we are going to continue to fight each other. There needs to be a democratic choice followed by accommodation, alliances, and unity. And I think this is the way Egypt is going. This is the way Tunisia have gone. And if that happens in Palestine, the Holy Land will have given a new secular push to the modernization of the Arab world and the closeness of that secular drive with the Turkish model of political Islam. Therefore, I am optimistic. I think the uprising is a post-Islamic uprising. It's the uprising of the quest for dignity, for freedom and independence, a drive that will bring together Islamists and social democrats in the Arab world, but will do so equally in Palestine. It's also a drive for a serious quest for a real peace with Israel, not with the kind of peace that Mr. Netanyahu is trying to impose upon us. This is not peace. This is the worst kind of racist domination and exploitation. This cannot go on. An Islamic world like the one I'm describing is going to produce strength for quest of a real peace. I agree with my dear friend yesterday who said none of the Islamic movements today want to go back to war with Israel. Yes, I agree. So we do. We in Palestine do not want to go back to war. We do not want to go back to violence. That's why we seek international support. That's why we're seeking non-violent struggle, because we feel that's the way to make the cost of occupation very high for Israel, to push Israel back to a two-state approach. And I think that is already acceptable in the Arab world, both in its Islamists and its social democratic and liberal wings of the revolution. But it will produce a stronger Arab world. An Arab world which I hope will make better deals with Europe and the United States in the overall configuration of a new Middle East, with a Palestinian-Israeli peace in the midst of it. We're not going to accept what used to be accepted. Europe will have to change, will have to deal with the new Arab world altogether, not with Maghreb alone and with the Gulf alone and with Egypt alone and with Iraq alone. There will have to be a new European Arab alliance. There need to be a better understanding by the Americans of what the Arabs want, and the centrality of Palestine within the Arab dream for dignity and independence and a future of economic prosperity and progress. And I think that is something the Arab uprising is doing. It's changing the narrative, not only for the Arabs and the Palestinians, but hopefully in the world, in Europe and in America. And if that happens, I think the peace process will find a real push and a real support, a real peace process based on equality, based on dignity for the Palestinians, the Arabs, and the Israelis, based on security for all of them, end of exploitation and colonization, two states side by side with very concrete borders, but borders that we will decide to erase when there is real peace in that part of the world. This is the dream that the Palestinian has, and I think it has been strengthened considerably by the Arab uprising.
Thank you so much for your clear words and statements. Dr. Segenreich, it seemed to us that Israel was not happy at all about the changes going on in the region. They lost one of their most trusted friends, President Mubarak, in Egypt, and they said they only see chaos around them. They seem to be paralyzed also concerning the peace process. Everything seems stuck. Doesn't look like that the Israeli government want to move. How do you see it? Is there a chance of a new dynamic, or is there a chance that the Arab Peace Initiative of 2002 is taken up again and seen as a way to move forward?
Well, I think Israel, as anybody else in the world, was also completely taken by surprise by this sudden uprising. They did not see it coming, although they are sitting right in the middle of this. There were even assessments, even after it started already in Egypt. You heard Israeli specialists, Secret Service people saying, well, Mubarak is so strong, Egypt is not Tunisia, and Mubarak will stay. And as anybody else, Israelis are now rubbing their eyes, seeing a historical development in their environment and still not knowing where it is going. But one difference was there from the beginning. At no stage, I would say, was there in Israel this kind of euphoria and optimism you could feel, of course, also maybe among the Palestinians and in the Western world, at least at the beginning. The Israelis were saying, well, if this really leads to more democracy and human rights and prosperity and happiness, then it's fine and it's good for the region. But we know the environment and we are skeptical. We think, they said in Israel, that this will be going to a lot of bloodshed and tribal war and setbacks. And elections alone do not make democracy. It also depends on who are the candidates and who will be the winners. So they were very, very skeptical from the beginning. And up to now, I would say, I mean, it's a short period, but they have proven right, more or less. Simultaneously, they're in a way condemned to be passive. They're condemned to be silent, because even if they had some preference for one or the other party or group struggling in the different Arab countries, they are not allowed to say so, of course, because they would harm by adopting or by expressing sympathy for one of the group. They would harm this group, because one thing has not changed. Israel is still conceived in the Arab world as a kind of enemy, and you cannot express sympathy for any of the groups. They can just wait and see. Now, has Israel been playing, or the topic of Israel been playing a role in the different Arab uprisings? I don't think so. If you look at most of the countries, Israel had not even been mentioned there. Even now in Syria, it's not there in the conflict going on there. Certainly not in Tunisia. The representative talking yesterday confirmed this. Of course, to a certain degree, the topic of Israel was present in Egypt, and Egypt, of course, is a key country for Israel. We have seen certain development there concerning Israel. Of course, every one of the candidates for presidency in Egypt had something to say about the Israeli-Egypt peace agreement. It was mainly, all of them said something so in between, differentiated. They would have a new look at this peace agreement, but still nobody said they would cancel it or recall it. We have had some development, like the dangerous storming of the Israeli embassy in Cairo in last September. Of course, we have this influence now in Sinai, which is bordering with the Gaza Strip and Israel, where there's a certain amount of chaos, violence having been spelled over the border, and of course the sabotaging of these famous natural gas pipelines, which now also led to the formal revocation of the natural gas agreement between Israel and Egypt. Both sides tried to play it down. They said, well, this was only a business matter. It was not a political matter, this natural gas issue. But of course, it also has a political dimension. It was a kind of political setback. And it also, of course, was a kind of blow for Israel in the way that they now have to spend more money for their energy supplies. But still, Israel, right for the moment, I think, can only watch. And there is also, of course, the question of the possible existing or non-existing connection between what is called the peace process, I mean the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, and the Arab Spring. And there has been a school of thought, mainly in the beginning, also among the Palestinians and also in Europe, saying that there was a connection. It went like this, saying that, well, the Middle East is moving, everything is changing, we are moving towards a new age. In the Middle East, more freedom, more liberty, and Israelis and Palestinians also have to move now. This is the opportunity, they cannot stay back. I do not really agree with this line of thought, because I think really, in fact, there is no real connection between the two things. The Arab Spring is about domestic issues in each and every of the Arab countries. Each of these countries is a different case, but generally it is a struggle for reform, for revolution, for toppling a leader, a dictator, for more prosperity. It's a domestic thing. And the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, by definition, is an exterior thing. It's a conflict between two peoples. It's a territorial conflict. So, and this conflict goes with heavy, fat problems, which are well known, which were impossible to resolve until now, the well-known problems like Jerusalem, refugees, the border, the Palestinian state, the settlements. And these problems are still with us. And if Mubarak rules in Egypt to somebody else, or Assad stays in power in Damascus to somebody else, this does not make, let's say, the problem of partitioning Jerusalem more easy or more difficult to resolve. I would even say that in a short term or in a medium term, it has become more difficult. Because if Israelis and Palestinians want to make peace, the leaders on both sides would have to take some risks, would have to make some compromises. And in an atmosphere like the prevailing atmosphere linked to the Arab Spring, you are not inclined to take risks. You are inclined to be careful, to watch who is gaining power, where. It could influence your decisions about security, about borders. So I think both sides are now naturally inclined to take a wait-and-see attitude, to be careful. And I'm afraid that for the time being, the Arab Spring is not helpful for promoting peace between Israelis and Palestinians.
Thank you very much. Dr. Reinicke, you know the region since a long time. You are following the peace process since probably 20 years. Do you see any chances that there might be a movement And we in Europe, we pay, we talked yesterday, annually around 460 million euro to Palestinian institutions. The same amount of money comes from bilateral EU governments. Do you think we as European Union, we are actually holding up the solution of the conflict as we are paying for the costs which usually the occupying power has to pay, namely Israel or the Palestinians themselves? Do you think this is at the end a hindrance to a speeding up of finding a solution?
I don't think it's a hindrance. I think it is an expression of the foreign policy which the European Union was pursuing since a long time. And I wanted to just make a short remark to what you said in the beginning on the American president with the Bemina initiative, challenging for the first time the Arab leaders. I must say it's the Europeans who did this first, because the European, in creating a policy with the Barcelona process, where much earlier, in 1996, we started an approach to the whole Arab region, southern Mediterranean region in particular, not necessarily the Arab region, to the Gulf region for different reasons, which much later on was then, if I may say, copied or taken up by the Americans. We didn't make this direct political choice. It's saying, we challenge you, because we didn't think this is the right way to do it. We just say, look, there is a situation, we'll be ready to help, let's create something. We also invested much more money, by the way. I think the amount which just through the Barcelona process was included was per year roughly €1 billion. So it's a much bigger amount, which also is an expression of that the European Union already, since many years, was pursuing a policy of engaging with the Arab world, engaging with the southern Mediterranean world on lots of issues, like democracy, like state building, like infrastructure, which is a part of the whole thing. And I think the influence which in the thinking process and the discussion process of the various experts, political meetings which we had, I think was very important also in creating an atmosphere which then suddenly led to what you said was a surprise. But in the end, I don't think it was really a surprise. The moment it was a surprise, because nobody knew that suddenly there was one man, Mohammed Bouazizi, who burned himself. It was the spark. But that the situation was ripe, we could all sense it's a long time. We didn't know just when it happened, and there we were surprised in that sense. So I think the European Union and we Europeans had this approach in a long time, and I don't think we should hide this. We should not make a big political issue in the sense of we ask something from you. We just would say we pursue a policy. We pursued a policy, and we will continue to pursue a policy of cooperation, which will lead to this. Now, what does it mean for the peace process? And I was listening with interest your two approaches, and I must say both is right. Obviously, the situation in the Arab world leads to a new security assessment from the side of Israel. It's clear. We have seen the situation in the Sinai. We have not discussed yet the situation as it is on the Syrian side and the Lebanese side, which obviously in the ongoing power struggle will lead to a new security assessment on the side of Israel. So it's very understandable that from a purely military point of view, one is very careful to see what's happening. On the other side, as David Shah said, there is a complete new, I would say, geostrategic development in the whole region. And what we did not touch it, because it's not the Arab Spring and the right domestic spark as such, but it's really the movement in the whole geopolitical context which we have to look at. Iran, what does it mean? The Iranian-Arab relationship, the relationship of the Gulf states, the very critical relation of the Gulf states towards Iran. How will the strategic relationship develop around Syria, Lebanon? Is Hezbollah then in the end attacking Israel, or maybe may they say if they lose the support of Iranian, we rather concentrate on Lebanon as a domestic situation? We don't know yet, but there is certainly a lot of move in the context. And I think that we all who are dealing with the Middle East peace process should have a very close look into this move. We should obviously not underestimate the risks, but I think also we should look at the options and opportunities which there are. Maybe there are new coalitions possible. Maybe that some of the Arab leaders will say, look, we have enough problems with our domestic situation. We don't need this additional fight, this additional conflict in the Middle East, which is constantly used by the radicals in our countries against us. Maybe we should just now try to move somewhere. Maybe the time in that point of view is ripe for rapprochement with Israel. But we all have seen this. Whatever there has been, if the core conflict, the Israel-Palestinian conflict, is not resolved, this approach will be most likely not possible. So if we want to use the political, or explore the political options which this new strategic situation has, or as you say, the most important movement in the Arab history, if we don't want to exploit, I think we should try to get ourselves ready and finally get a final settlement for the Middle East problem in order to explore the chances also for the rearrangement and reorientation of the whole Arab world. I think that's where we are. We should not jump on every single move very quickly, but we should not just close our doors and wait another 5-10 years and then suddenly realize everything is set and we have missed another opportunity. I think that's where we are now, and we should use this opportunity.
Thank you so much. It was very interesting what you said on Iran. I think we really see a change of alliances. Of course, very often not seen openly, but we know that Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, maybe Egypt see Iran as the biggest threat to the region. The same way as Israel sees it. I think the services of these countries are closely changing information, cooperating. How does this, Dr. Schatt, affect, do you think, the peace process? When you see that Israel is talking with the Gulf states, with Saudi Arabia, and with other states of the Sunni Arab world, in order to build up strength and adjust to the threat of Iran?
I would suggest that you read statements by Mr. Lieberman, by Mr. Mofaz, and by the two ex-security chiefs of Israel, Mr. Dagan and his colleagues, really saying that this exaggeration about the Iranian threat to Israel should be made much clearer, that our real threat, strategic threat, does not come from Israel, from Iran. Iran is a very important diversionary tactic in order to get the world off the Palestinian issue and to concentrate on another issue. I'm just quoting Israeli hardliners. I'm not making my own estimation. Of course, Iran became an important factor when the Americans destroyed its two neighbors, Iraq and Afghanistan. And Iran emerged as a major power with tentacles on the Mediterranean and other places. And obviously, I am worried about the nuclear threat from Israel as much as I'm worried about the nuclear threat from Iran or from any other party that would have nuclear weapons in my part of the world, because it will destroy us. But I think the priorities should be laid very clear. I mean, I think the Arab uprising, to some extent, have shadowed a little bit and minimized the super importance of Iran in determining what happens in this part of the world. And we are still at the beginning. Iran needs to be negotiated with. I am following the American statements in the last 2 days with some measure of encouragement that Iran is maybe going in the right direction. Iran's issue should be handled as an issue on its own, but it's definitely not a substitute for the Palestine-Israeli issue, nor can the Palestinian-Israeli and Arab-Israeli issue be minimized the way you've just posited to us. The issues in the Arab world, yes, they are about a lot of internal issues, but we are talking realpolitik, my friend. In the final analysis, determining where the borders in Jerusalem run, or determining how much authority the Palestinians should regain from the Israeli occupation, ending Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, are not internal matters at all, and they would have not possibly been on our hands had it not been for an international configuration, for an American position, a European position, a Soviet and Russian position, a global positioning. It's not just about justice. If it was about justice, I'm sure every European feels very much in his bones the justice of the Palestinian case. It's about how do you turn justice into realpolitik action that changes what's happening. And the Arab Spring is one of those aspects that should change the importance of the Arab world in this global configuration, in Arab relationship with America and Arab relationship with Europe, which were absolutely very important in the Madrid arrangement. Why did we go to Madrid? Because of the collapse of the Soviet Union and the alliance occupation of the Gulf. It's a result of that the strategic importance of Israel changed, and the Americans invested it in trying to bring all the parties to a peace process in Madrid. It was not just suddenly that Mr. Shamir in Israel discovered the justice of the Palestinian cause. It was about a configuration in the area that changed power relationships. I am talking about power relationships changing, and in my mind, in the right direction. Not in the direction of war, not in the direction of a total confrontation, but in the direction of changing the calculus for America, for Europe, for Israel, and for the Arab world. It is this changing of the calculus that might shake up that stalled, that rusty peace process in which Mr. Netanyahu and his government are colonizing every bit of the West Bank and Gaza while we are talking about land for peace. While we are talking about an international configuration in which the Arab-Israeli peace is at the center of any Middle Eastern policy of Europe and the United States. And finally, I think it's too marginalizing to talk about quote-unquote domestic issues in the Arab world. If it was all domestic, how about the rise of Islam? Why did militant Islam rise? Just to change the wage level in Tunisia, or to attend to Mr. Bouaziz's tragic suicide? It's not. The Arab world has faced a total loss of dignity and respect and security from its relationship not only with its rulers, but also with the international community. This feeling of alienation by the Arabs and the Muslims, this feeling of unfairness and inconsistency and double standard is part of this rise of an Arab revolt for independence and dignity. And a great part of that humiliation that the Arabs were hit with was a result of the Israeli-Palestinian issue and the result of the tragedy of the Palestinian people and its effect in the war of 67 and 56 before that, and 37, and all the conflagrations in the area has really centered on that. All the relationships of the Arab world with Europe and the West have centered on that. The role of the Soviet Union came in as part of that configuration. Iran's role, even Turkey's role, that moderate progressive role, is also part of that configuration. And therefore, I really beg of you, don't marginalize the role of the Arab-Israeli conflict and the Arab and the Palestinian-Israeli peace process at the center of these conflagrations in the Arab world. It's just that I'm pointing to a direction of hope, not a direction of darkness. And I think the Arab uprising should be with the support of Europe and the international community pushed into the direction of hope that produces also hope for the Palestinians and the Israelis.
Dr. Reinecke would like to respond.
Yes, I would like to respond in the sense that I would still make the focus a little different, Dr. Shah. I agree that the Israel-Palestinian conflict is sensed as a humiliation factor among the Arab population. But to give you my last experience in Syria, in the whole context of the uprising, the Palestinian conflict did not play a role. It's really the domestic issue which plays a role. Nonetheless, in the final analysis, I still share your analysis saying whatever the weight is, it does play the role, whether it plays a major role or it plays a smaller role, it certainly does play a role in the whole concept of regaining dignity. There I would agree, but I don't think that it is in the center. It is a part of it, I think my feeling of the center is rather domestic, the domestic situation, but I agree it's part of the feeling of humiliation in the Arab world. So that's why we have to deal with this issue somehow. And I certainly will not agree with the position, say, let's wait and see another 10, 20, 30 years and let's see what's coming. We can certainly do this, but that means that for the next 10, 20, 30 years, there is a wound in the Arab world, in the region, not in the Arab world, but in this region, which is always there and which can always empoison the situation. I don't think we should allow this. So that's why in the analysis, in the result, I agree with you, but not in the weighting of the conflict.
May I add something? Of course, I completely agree with you that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is influenced by global and regional aspects and constellation, no doubt about it. But finally, it boils down to bringing Israelis and Palestinians to a negotiating table, and they must resolve their own problems. And these attempts have been going on for a very, very long period of time. And they did not bear any results. And of course, as we know, an imposed solution from outside would not work. And again, I did not see, except that for Egypt in a certain way, that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or the Israel, as you said, did play any role in these uprisings, because again, I think they were about better wages and reforms and human rights and women's rights and things like this. Now you place also your hope on a kind of new direction in the political Islam, which would be more moderate, hopefully. We do not know at all where it is leading to. We don't know who will prevail, and we do not know if Islamists will prevail, if they will be more moderate or less moderate. Of course, one factor which can be looked at is also Hamas. And we talked about the possible reconciliation. There have been many attempts which up to now have not led to any result. But one must also remark that there could be, or up to now there was, a certain contradiction in the demands having been put up by the Western world, particularly also the European Union. Of course, there's one demand for negotiations, for having negotiations with a peace process between Israelis and Palestinians. And on the other hand, you have a demand for internal Palestinian reconciliation. But in the past, we have already seen that this could be a contradiction, because the moment you have Palestinian reconciliation, you have Hamas in the government. And according to the parameters prevailing now, this would mean an immediate collapse of the peace process, because, of course, Hamas is boycotted by Israel. It is probably also boycotted by the United States, and maybe even by the European Union, because Hamas is still listed as a terror organization by the European Union. So in a way, you could have either Palestinian reconciliation or a peace process, and not both of it. That's the way it looks. And of course, if Hamas changes, your hope is obviously if Hamas is taken into the government, it will share responsibility and it will become more moderate. Well, if Hamas becomes more moderate, I think this is very good news. If Hamas stops, of course, but we're talking about Hamas. Hamas was not part of the peace process and was not willing to negotiate. The other parties, Fatah, or of course the Palestinian autonomy, was ready to negotiate. Hamas was not part of this negotiation. Now, if Hamas, in a way, stops to be Hamas, that's fine. But right now, it's still wishful thinking.
Question to Dr. Segenreich. Arab countries always complain, they have the impression that Israel does not want to integrate in the region. There was the offer, as I said before, of the Arab peace plan. It was a genuine offer of 22 Arab states, and also endorsed by the member countries of the Organization of the Islamic Conference, which are 57 states. They said that we have the impression that Israel wants to be a partner of Europe, of Canada, of the United States, of Japan, but not be part of the region. Would you agree to this statement or contradict?
Yes, no, to a certain degree I would agree. Israel is different. Israel is a Jewish country in the midst of Arab countries of an Islamic world, and Israel is very much oriented toward Europe. It has been created, if you so want, by Europeans, European socialists, European Zionists, or whatever. They're dependent on America to a certain degree. They have Western, they see themselves as a Western country, whereas the other countries in the region do not see themselves as Western countries. So in that way, Israel cannot really be it wants to have good relations with all the countries. It wants to be accepted. It calls for peace. I mean, you can say they don't really mean it, but at least rhetorically, that's what they do. So yes, they will never really be part of a region, completely integrated or assimilated into that region. And as far as the Arab peace plan is concerned, I think they would have no problem with it, but it does not really solve the problem. The Arab peace plan is not a concrete plan, it's a kind of promise for the future. They say if Israelis and Palestinians resolve their problems, if there is a peace agreement between Israelis and Palestinians, then the Arab world would adopt it, would embrace Israel, and would support it, and this would be the wonderful, miraculous times. But still, there is no recipe there for resolving the conflict by itself, which must be done, as I already said, by Israelis and Palestinians themselves. If by miracle they succeed in this, then, according to the Arab peace plan, most of the Arab countries would adopt it and would stand behind them, and then we would have really a new Middle East.
Please, Dr. Reinecke.
2 points, and I would like to come back to this. We have, as you said, a changing strategic environment. You have described the situation how it was 89 Gulf War. It's a different situation, obviously we cannot compare it, but it's clearly a move. Now we can use this move because, as we know, historical moves also need to be used and taken up one day. Or we can lean back. We can say the experience also from 89 in Europe, if at certain situations the politicians have not stepped in relatively soon and tried to send out signals of cooperation, it would not have worked. So you have to get the right moment. I think the right moment is now. That's the first point. And I don't think we should be afraid of exploring it. Exploring doesn't mean making a decision today, but we should explore it. We should not sit back and say, oh, it doesn't work and it's so complicated, it's so difficult. No, we should use the situation. That's the one point. And my second point is, and really, since I'm following this peace process, I hear from both sides always extremely interesting and very good analysis why the other side, why they cannot make a deal with the other side. The other side has a mistake. I would beg one time to hear arguments why my side could do something or my side could contribute to a solution. I think we should finally get away from this finger pointing at the others. If you want to make a deal, we have to approach it, we have to do it. If we don't want to make a deal, I find 100 arguments always on the other side why I cannot do this. I think we have to change this. If we don't do this, we won't get anywhere. So please let's not miss this situation, this really historical situation which we have right now, to explore ways and means for a solution in this conflict, for a final settlement of this conflict.
Excuse me. Please, Dr. Schacht.
I really would like very much to persuade you to dismiss the issue that Arab-Israeli peace is about negotiations between the Palestinians and the Israelis. I mean, what looks like a very plausible argument, which, by the way, took place at certain times, but only because of the context and the players, and not just because of changes in the general vision of what the problem is all about. I was party with this young gentleman, Yossi Beilin, to extensive negotiations which took place. There were two excellent players, Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat, who were ready, and there was the context, a very important context of the end of the Soviet Union and of the changes in the Gulf, and the context was different, the players were different, and the international community signaled in Madrid with a very important American voice, very important. The Bush-Baker voice was a sonorous voice. Come down and sit together and let us see what we can do. And when the Americans got busy a little later with their elections, the loss of the presidency of Bush and Baker to Mr. Clinton, the Israelis and the Palestinians went on their own to a European country known as Norway and tried to continue what was started in effect by this changing configuration and seriousness of the players who wanted to make something out of it. This is really the only case in which there was real success, a chance for success in a changing world, and a set of players that really were unique for a variety of reasons I don't want to talk about today. Before that was the Egyptian-Israeli peace process. My God, do we need another war of 1973 in order to bring the Israelis to negotiations chaperoned by Mr. Carter in Camp David in the United States? But it worked. But the cost was a huge 1973 war that brought about that changing context, and then the players which looked very unlikely, Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin, chaperoned by Mr. Carter. And I think the three did marvelous thing. By the way, I think Anwar Sadat is the most unfairly treated modern leader in history. The man won the Arab world's only real war and the Arab world's only real peace process. And yet people ignore him, marginalize him. But Carter too, the man did a fabulous job. I know he's a very, very close friend, and I know exactly how things went down. These contextual opportunities and player opportunities do not exist. The Israelis are the occupying power. They decide what they do, what they want. They call for you to go to negotiations while building new colonies, taking your water and land, separating your country, determining your internal policy, deciding which Palestinian is kosher and which is not, determining whether a Palestinian from Gaza can live in the West Bank or not, deciding on every little life of freakish control. I've never seen anything like it. You tell me go to negotiate with them? We have been negotiating with them. Many times I feel insulted. I spent 40 years of my life negotiating with Israelis, 20 of them officially and 20 of them while being accused as a traitor by Abu Nidal and put on his assassination list. So the question is not go to negotiation. Go to negotiations to do what? You need an umpire with a red card when one of the parties changes the terms of reference that they should send the red card. You are out of order, sir. Get out of the room. Imagine if we go to a negotiation with Israel today, and Sa'ib Arakat starts the meeting by saying, I must say, gentlemen, that we do not believe in the border of 67 anymore. And I think Jaffa and Haifa are important Arab cities that should be part of the Palestinian state. That's precisely what Mr. Netanyahu is saying. Every time we go to negotiations, Mr. Netanyahu says, no, sorry, the border of 67 is irrelevant. We want all the River Jordan Valley. We cannot negotiate Jerusalem. And we need 10 kilometers deep into the western border of the West Bank to protect Israel's security. And we want to annex all the settlement blocks in the West Bank. And we want to keep Gaza and the West Bank separated. Those who attend from the quartet don't even raise a red card. Telling, what are you talking about? What negotiations are these? If you keep changing the terms of reference, if you do not implement what has been agreed before, if you still occupy militarily all of the West Bank when we are financing 60,000 Palestinian policemen to protect the Israeli security, what are you talking about? What negotiations? And therefore, excuse me for trivializing the situation. Yes, eventually we have to go back to negotiation. There is no other solution but a two-state policy. It's a dream to have a one-state, democratic state, something like South Africa. It's a dream, but it has very little chance of success. The only potential is a two-state policy achieved by negotiations. But you have to create the context, the international, Arab, and Israeli context, to encourage the right players and to set the rules, and then send us to negotiations to finish within 6 months. And I tell you, it can be done. Otherwise, I think we are just acting to keep this occupation strangling the Palestinian people, eating every bit of land through colonization. So in 10 years, there will be no Palestine and no West Bank and no chance for a future of two-state policy. I think that is what I hope, pray that the Arab uprising will help us do by changing the context and providing the right players.
Let me just
Dr.
add
Segner,
to one comment. In one sense, we completely agree, in fact. Of course, we have to go back to negotiations, and we need somebody, as you said, to have the red card, whatever. But I'm afraid right now, global attention is elsewhere. It's not at the Palestinian problem. The problem is still there. It is still hurting. It should be resolved. Right in that moment, people, local, global leaders, whatever, are preoccupied by other things. That's what I'm saying.
But if, of course, both parties would like to move ahead, you don't need anybody from outside. I mean, you could move forward just sitting together alone. You don't need any
sure.
any
And I agree with Dr. Schad that you do need somebody to chaperone, as he said, and to lead the parties and to be an umpire. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we will should open the floor to questions. Time is moving ahead. Please, Ambassador.
Sorry, I have a question to Dr. Natasha. I'm from Russia. Well, you said one very important thesis that you hope that Arab Spring will influence positively on the peace process in the Middle East. But there is another view, it's not my view, but there is a view, that Arab Spring has a bad influence on peace process, because how can you explain, for instance, obstinacy of Israel government? Why Israel is not so flexible in their negotiations, especially dealing with the issue of settlements? Isn't it a result of Arab Spring? For instance, this turmoil in Arab territories at this moment, isn't it in favor of Israel? Didn't they try to use it for their interests, just not to make some concessions, not to be more flexible in negotiations? That's my question.
Well, the Arab Spring is definitely not an excuse why Israel is building settlements. But it's an excuse for the Israelis not to do anything, hoping that the Arabs will be too busy in the Arab Spring. Look at it the other way around. If you ask me, why is Mr. Netanyahu playing this game? The man is a very pragmatic man. I mean, yes, there are some Torah historical visions in his mind, but he's a pragmatist. His calculation is the following. The Americans are too busy with their elections. The Europeans are too busy with their Euro problems. The Arabs are too busy with their Arab Spring. I don't have any local opposition. And if there was one, now with this convenience marriage with Mr. Mofaz, I have 92 members of the Knesset. The Palestinians will not go back to violence. And that I can assure you that, yes, this is our decision, not to go back to violence. And why should I care? I can grab as much territory during this period as I can until the world changes again, and until the Arab Spring becomes a factor, until the Americans end their election campaign, until somehow the Europeans have a stronger euro. I mean, this is the pragmatic calculation of Mr. Netanyahu. He is using the Arab Spring as a pretext for not doing anything in the other direction. But he cannot explain why is he doing this for the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring, yes, did not explode out of the Palestine issue. I agree. But I agree with Francois here, who has really made an excellent analysis, saying nobody can predict how things explode. They might explode out of Abu Azizi committing suicide. But everything was ready for the explosion. Everybody was ready for that spark. The spark was not Palestine, I agree. But then when the Arab Spring is in its youth, then the Arabs will have to decide their priorities. And here I think the Palestinian-Israeli issue will always come back as a very important priority. for also the safety and security of the Arabs in the future. I think Mr. Netanyahu is playing a game of short-term interest versus long-term interest, and that is really going to make things much more difficult, and that is going to incite the Arab Spring to catch interest in the Arab-Israeli issue much earlier than it could have. Had there been in Israel a rabbin who decided that no, this is the time to come to the Arabs and tell them, here is my hand, I'm willing to do with you what was not being done before, things might have changed, but that is not Mr. Netanyahu, unfortunately.
Dr. Reinecke?
I just wanted to grab on one of your remarks saying the world, and you also mentioned this, the world is busy with other things, and the Europeans are busy with the euro, etc. It's true, the European Union is busy with the euro, but I can assure you that the capacities of the European Union to deal is bigger than to deal just with one problem, although the euro is a big problem. I would add, nonetheless, and just emphasize this, that we as Europeans have of our own interest that this conflict at the south is now resolved. And we have this interest for strategic reasons, and we have this interest also for financial reasons. You said this, you asked me this question right at the beginning. The European Union, only the European Union, paid in 2011 436 million euros, plus almost the same amount from the member countries each year. It's a lot of money. It's an immense lot of money. And the question is, how long are we willing and how long are we able to pay? I'm not saying, well, maybe this money is spent somewhere else. Better than in this context. So I think we have an own interest as the European Union that this conflict is resolved, and this is independent of the euro or not of the euro, number one. Another argument, again concerning the strategic context. What will bring the Israelis to make a deal? If you see various arguments, you have a logic and other arguments, but the prevailing argument in the Israeli society is security. Now, there are various definitions of security. But obviously, security is, to one degree, defined by military security. But we all know this is our European interest, that security is also political security, the political horizon which we need. The question is whether we should not explore it in this direction. And this is an exploration from both sides. It's an exploration which the Israelis should do, but also an exploration which the Arab states should do. Say, are we able to offer something to Israel in exchange for a deal? A real deal, not a deal, a real deal. I think the sort of exploration we both have to do. And again, I can assure you, we have an own interest. And if you, by the way, if you look in the last conclusion of the Council of the Foreign Ministers of this May, you find for the first time a phrase in there saying that the settlement of this conflict is in the interest of both parties and the European Union. So I think we have to go in this direction, and we all have to explore these ways and means, and please just don't finger point always at the others. We should first finger point at us and see what we can do.
Thank you very much. Questions from the floor? Madam Ambassador?
I won't ask a question. I would just like to make a comment as regards the Mediterranean strategy of the European Union. As regards Mr. Schat, which he very eloquently described the situation or the history of the uprising, he referred to it as a post-colonial era, and maybe I would add that it was post-colonial plus, I think, Cold War structures which were at place. So I, in my opinion, call it the normalization of history.
A normalization?
Normalization of history, because this was not normal. As regards Barcelona process, I have very much affection to the process. I followed it from the beginning. I deemed it very useful. It was a very useful platform between, which gathered the north and the south of the Mediterranean. As you have said, it had three dimensions: political, economic, and social. The political was not very well functioning due to the very well-known reasons, but the economic and the social volets were functioning very well. It had a bank, it had a parliament, it had progress was being made towards a free trade area. So there was a good structure, and I think a good platform that would bring the North and the South and the parties of the Middle East process together on the same platform. But since 2007, when Mr. Sarkozy decided to demolish Euromed and establish the Union for the Mediterranean, I think European Union, by allowing itself to be driven by Mr. Sarkozy's caprices to establish this new structure, while the old structure was functioning very well, there has not been any political meeting. One summit for the establishment, and I think in 2007, one ministerial meeting in Marseille, and that's it. It's not functioning. The two sides are not coming together, and even the technical infrastructure which was there as regards transport, energy, and other issues which were very well functioning, they cannot come together at technical level. So it's a pity. I think the European Union has lost a very useful tool in bringing the North and the South together. We attribute great importance to the Mediterranean, and it is, and we regarded the Euromed as an important, and also the Union for the Mediterranean. We have a Deputy Secretary General there, but it's not functioning, and it's a pity. I just wanted to, and as regards I would say, the allocations made by the EU to the Mediterranean strategy, it was on project basis. I think it was much better to have joint projects than having direct, I would say, contributions. But it's a pity that's no more functioning.
Thank you.
I know the history very well of the Barcelona Process and Union of Mediterranean, and there's a long argument of pro and cons about this. So allow me just to limit myself to this remark.
May I really commend the last statement by the European Union's ministers. I think it was quite a step ahead for European statements on the issues. I agree very much, Mr. Reinecke. I'm very happy Reinecke is back. He was very early in the game, representative of Germany to the Palestinian Authority, and during a time when Germany and Europe produced significant amount of help, not only to shore up our budgetary financing, but to build the infrastructure of a state to come in peace. And that is, I don't want to marginalize the role of Europe at all, but I think Europe somehow must come to terms with the Arab world, terms that are really in the interest of both Europe and the Arab world. And I think this is the time that Europe can see in the Middle East a coming democracy and coming maturity that will bring around a chance for peace on a totally different terms. I think Europe needs to consider that the Arabs are an entity that needs to be talked to and made use of, including possible help for the Euro problems that Europe is having at this time. And Palestine and Palestinian-Israeli peace will definitely be at the heart of that. But we need a more assertive Europe to playing the role I just talked about, that role of the empire who is really interested in making peace works. I know Europe is interested. The fact that we are here is another, in this beautiful, magnificent Vienna, with this an old colleague in the peace process. Again, I cannot prevent myself from being optimistic.
That's good.
Thank you, Dr. Schat. Please.
Good morning. Razib Ahmed from the Club de Tunis. Thank you. Razib Ahmed from the Club de Tunis. My question is for the representative of the EU. We from Tunisia and North Africa, we have the impression that the EU has not a clear vision or a clear strategy following the Arab Spring. So my question to you, is there something which is under preparation in Brussels? Will you involve Southern Mediterranean countries in this new strategy, and more especially the private sector? Because I think that the private sector has a crucial role to play to create jobs and to enhance living standards in the regions. Then also, what about the advanced status that should be negotiated bilaterally with each Mediterranean countries that has done its duty as far as democracy and human rights are respected? And what about this 5+5 framework that should be revived again, following also what the US is doing with NAPEO for North Africa? I think that as far as regional integration is concerned, the idea to start consolidating what is in having variable geometry, as Europe did, starting with those who are ready, and then keep the process open to add those who are willing and ready to join afterwards, could be the right strategy. Thank you.
Thanks for your remark, but with all due respect, I beg to differ. I think the European Union has a very clear strategy. I would almost dare to say the European Union is the only one who has a clear strategy. Already at the very early stage, there was a very clear support from the European Union and the various member states towards the uprising. Now, obviously, it depends what you expect. The first thing is the European Union developed what they call a southern strategy for the southern Mediterranean, I think is the name for this, which is financial support for those countries. What the European Union has as a strategy is something which is hidden behind the phrase more for more. That means we look at what is the approach, what is the results, and then we're ready to give more money. So the European Union doesn't put a big bundle of money on the table and say, please help yourself, but we say, here are the euros, but you only get them under 1, 2, 3 conditions. And this we are negotiating. The second tool which we have is what in the context of the instruments the European Union has developed over the last decades, I must say, what we call the association agreements and action plans. I understand that this is a relatively complex discussion, but with all neighbors, east and south of the European Union, we have agreements in order to get them closer to the European Union, including the private sector. We know that public money is only a little bit. What makes the economy strive is the private sector. So there are lots of negotiations on inputs, on imports, exports, a lot of various interests. And the negotiation is sometimes difficult because if you have importer one on product one, whatever we say as European that we should open the market, you suddenly find the exporter in Europe will say, well, we like your idea, but please not on this product. So we have a lot of individual things which we have to negotiate, but I think we are doing this. Lady Ashton and the European member states have appointed Bernardino Leon as a special representative for the Arab world, for the southern Mediterranean. And he is really daily working there. His office is next to mine. We hardly see each other because we're always traveling. It doesn't mean that traveling by itself is already a value, but it just tells you how much there's the outreach. So I think we have the strategy, which doesn't mean that it may not be improved. We constantly have to ask ourselves, what do we have to add to this? I agree with this. But what is important that we are negotiating on an equal level. So it's not like this. It has to be on the same side, on the same level, which is very important for all of us. And I think we have to pay respect to the other state. We have to represent our various interests, but I can assure you that particularly Tunisia is the country which we are observing very carefully, because indeed, although Egypt is the biggest, most important country, Tunisia is maybe the country which is, because it is smaller, maybe the first who has a chance there, besides Palestine, I must add.
I agree.
If there are no questions, I just have another. I see there's a question. Ambassador of Egypt.
Thank you, Ambassador Swift. Too many points and too little time to tackle them all. But just one element on what was in the genesis of the spring or not, the Palestinian question or the conflict. maybe not at the beginnings, but it is there now in every single step of the way. The key word for the spring that has to be realized is the word justice. And that applies across the board, across the region, including justice for the Palestinians as an individual, as a human being. Now, short question to Dr. Nabil. How many Palestinians do live in Israel?
Today?
Today, both
About
Christian and Muslim.
In Israel.
My question to you,
about 1.25 million.
That's in response to a very troubling statement that I heard from Dr.
Segenreich.
It's
too difficult.
And that was in response to the question posed to you on the affiliation of Israel. And you said it's a Jewish state in the midst of Arab-Muslim world. I think this is very troubling if it does represent the current or the mainstream thinking of the Israeli society, and that relates to integration within the region. I'm not sure if that does represent the mainstream thinking, or what you want it to be the mainstream thinking as well. It's the issue of integration in the region, of being part of the region. What I heard from you indicates that you don't want to be part of the region. So my question to you would be, what are you suggesting? Thank you.
You're addressing me as a spokesman of Israel, which I'm not, but I'm just reporting about what I know about Israel. And of course, Israel, I mean, these are very, very simple and obvious facts. Israel defines itself as a Jewish state. It's been founded as a Jewish state, as a state for the Jews. In a way, you can accept this or not ideologically, as Austria is a state for the Austrians. So it was a state for the Jews, which have also a large non-Jewish minority, who are citizens of the state, and that's a kind of reality. It's also a kind of simple reality that they see themselves as having Western values and not having exactly the traditions of the region, unless you go back to biblical times, which we do not want to do. Well, yes, they have a kind of community, which is the Jewish community in Israel, which has a certain identity and a certain view of themselves. And they also want a place geographically in this region with their particular identity.
Dr. Schatt, one question. How has the Arab Spring changed Israel-Arab relations? And from a secular European point of view, it's very difficult to follow the Sunni-Shia strife. We had that in the 16th century in Europe when Protestants and Catholics were fighting each other. And we see that now also going on, at least in terms of arguments and proselytizing between Sunni and Shia. How will that develop this sectarian strife?
You have till next morning. It's a long story. But look, Shiism and Sunnism in Islamic doctrine is really much more a political identification than a religious identification. It's very difficult really to see the differences that exist even within Christianity between Catholicism, Orthodoxy, and Protestantism, and reflected on Shiism and Sunnism. It's a much more an expression of historical political schism than it is a theological argument. And the Shia Muslims exist much more in the eastern outskirts of the Arab world and the non-Arab Muslim world. And we are talking about Iraq, we are talking about Iran, and part of Afghanistan, part of Pakistan, and you have a little bit part of the Gulf.
Azerbaijan.
And the only really offshoot of that that has become militant is the Hezbollah in the south of Lebanon. And of course, if you want to allow another extension of that, the Alawites in Syria. But really, again, it's very difficult to see any theological argument that will bring about sectarian explanation of a schism that we have seen in history among many other religious groups. Iran has strengthened the power of Shia leadership. And with the American occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan, Iran really rose as a regional power. One should not ignore what has happened in the attack on Iraq and the destruction of the unified Iraqi society, and what happened in Afghanistan as to the rise of Iran and its extension in the area around it. And again, it's a geopolitical phenomenon and not a theological phenomenon. And I think really with the rising Arab Spring and the moderation of Islam, to use again the Turkish model, it will marginalize a little bit the intensity of the Iran-Middle Eastern divides or the Iranian geopolitical importance within the Arab Middle Eastern section. I can see this. I know the fears in the Gulf. I know the worry about Iran's influence in Lebanon. But the Arab Spring is going to create a new paradigm in handling this issue. Arab Spring people are not against Iran, do not want to create a fight between Shiite Iran and Sunnite others. And I think the dialogue within the Muslim community and the diversity of Sunni Muslim presence today will lead also to a dialogue between Sunni and Shi'i forces in the area. Also a positive dialogue. I hope that Iran also will see a room for moderation in its talks and its dialogue about its nuclear power. Nobody wants to see a nuclear power proliferate in this part of the world. And again, I am encouraged by the fact that Iran's paramount importance in the news in the Middle East have gone down considerably since the Arab Spring.
I think this is a good ending. I just got the signal that we have to finish. I would like to thank you for your very valuable, interesting, and passionate contributions. I think you ended with a good word. We hope that Iran is willing to open its programs, and Dr. El Barada has just come. He has been there very often, so that this problem is solved, and the same goes with the Middle East peace problem, so that rather sooner than later we see a pacified Middle East moving ahead and having an integrated political union, economic union like we have in Europe. Thank you very much for your attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, we now come to the highlight of this year's seminar, our high-level panel, which will debate prospects for the future of the Middle East and North Africa. We have a great group of speakers and a wonderful chair, Edward Mortimer. As many of you know, Edward Mortimer was an accomplished journalist with the Financial Times, Director of Communication for Secretary General Kofi Annan, and most recently, Senior Vice President of the Salzburg Global Forum. I know that we are all very much looking forward to this panel. So without any further ado, Edward, I turn over to you. Thank you.
Andrea, thank you very much indeed. And it's an enormous honor for me to be asked to chair such an extremely distinguished panel, starting with our host, the Vice Chancellor and Foreign Minister of Austria, Dr. Michael Spindelegger. We have been enjoying your hospitality, sir, for the last 2 days, and it has been magnificent. Not least, we have been educated about the significance of the ceiling and the different paintings and the example set for us by Metternich and Talleyrand up there in the corner. I understand that you wish to open the proceedings with a statement, and we, of course, welcome that. So I think I will ask you to do that from the podium, and I will introduce the other members of the panel, actually none of whom probably need any introduction, after your statement. So the floor is yours. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, former colleagues, it's a great pleasure to welcome you here to this very famous International Peace Institute. Of course, Mr. President, it's always a pleasure to work with you. I would like to thank you all for participating in our seminar here today, and I would like to say some introductory remarks about future prospects, the revolution of expectations. I guess we all agree that 2 years ago it would have been difficult to foresee or expect that in 2011 Ben Ali of Tunisia, Mubarak of Egypt, Saleh of Yemen, and Libya's Muammar Gaddafi would be ousted from power by a popular revolt. Although we knew that most of the Arab people were governed by dictators, we did not see the ticking time bomb which led to the explosion of popular revolts. In retrospect, it is not surprising that the people of the Arab world went to the streets to express their deep anger. They had enough of their repressive political systems, the lack of freedom, and the stagnant economic and social situation. I think that the last straw which broke the camel's back, to use an Arab expression, was when the Arab rulers started to groom their sons for succession. The first example was Syria, when after the death of Hafez al-Assad in 2000, his son Bashir, an eye doctor, succeeded his father as if Syria were a monarchy. Mubarak, Saleh, and Gaddafi tried to follow the Syrian example and also prepared their sons for succession. I would like to look closer at events in some of the Arab countries, but would leave Egypt to my friend, Dr. Mohammed El-Baradei. I would like just to say something about Egypt, that the political and cultural center of the Arab world, as Egypt was, is one of the key countries for success of the transition processes in the Arab world. To our surprise, not those parties who supported the ideas of the young people from Tahrir Square won the elections, but the Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafists. We have closely followed the preparations for the presidential elections and are eager to get your analysis of what the new Egypt will look like. In Libya, the transformation process is more difficult than in Egypt and Tunisia, because Libya has hardly had any functioning state institutions. Therefore, it is to a certain degree remarkable to see that the security situation is not worse as it might have been expected, although there are serious problems, especially in the south, over the control of trade and smuggling routes between the Arab communities and Berber and Tuareg neighbors. The European Union stands ready to assist Libya as much as other countries in transition in managing these complex tasks. The European Union has organized workshops on civil society in Tripoli and Benghazi on 9th and 10th of May, and also assists Libya in building up an integrated border management. The Union is also preparing for negotiations on an association agreement with Libya, the only Mediterranean Arab country that had not fully participated in the Barcelona process right from the beginning. Syria is a more complex case. The regime still enjoys support from the Alawites and, to a minor degree, the business community and religious minorities. They, Alawites and religious minorities, are afraid that after Assad, they would not be protected anymore and would face an Iraqi scenario of sectarian conflict and bloodshed. Syria is also the playground of the struggle for regional dominance between Iran and Sunni Arab states led by Saudi Arabia and Qatar. If the Annan plan of securing an armistice between the government and the rebels, supervised by 300 military observers, and the opening of a transition process does not succeed, Syria might see a brutal and long civil war along sectarian lines. In any case, Russia will be key to convince President Assad to contribute to its success or to step aside in order to facilitate a dialogue between the government and the opposition. What are the proposals for the future? I'm convinced that the clock cannot be turned back. The political awakening of the Arab citizens demanding full participation and civil and political rights cannot be crushed by force. Wherever governments rest on fear, and fear finally is defeated and citizens dare to speak their mind, such regimes are finished. As mentioned before, developments in each country unfold according to its own history and particularities, which is why we have to look at each country separately. In Tunisia, where the so-called Arab Spring started, and which I visited together with Morocco last week, the developments are promising and reassuring. Elections to a constituent assembly have been free and fair. After the adoption of a new constitution, parliamentary elections will be held in spring 2013. My interlocutors stressed that there is a consensus of the people for change, but also highlighted the great economic and social expectations of the citizens. They underlined the importance of European tourists and investors coming back. I was glad to inform that OMV, Austria's flagship oil and gas company, is planning an investment of up to 2 billion euros, building a new gas pipeline from the south to the north. And I'm convinced that Tunisia will be a success story, giving a good example to the other Arab states in transition. In Morocco, there is also great confidence that the process of democratization will move ahead. My interlocutors rightly pointed out that the speed of the reform process has to be calibrated in a way that stability is preserved. They know that the path ahead is neither easy nor covered with roses. I was impressed by the commitment of the political leaders I met in Tunisia and Morocco. They work with great determination and vision in building democratic states, and I assured them of our support. Even in those Arab countries which did not have popular revolts like in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf countries, the governments have to be receptive to the demands of the people who also ask for more political participation and political rights. Expectations of the people in the Arab world are high. We know from the transformation processes of Central and Eastern Europe that especially economic and social advances don't happen overnight, but take many years to materialize. Europe can provide help for the transformation processes in closing much more coordination with the newly elected governments and in response to their needs, such as financing through the European Neighbourhood Policy, or from the European Investment Bank, or from the EBRD, for Egypt, Jordan, Tunisia and Morocco, and granting access to the EU market for services of agricultural products from these countries. Nevertheless, the bulk of the work has to be done by the countries and the people themselves. One of the most important elements in this regard is regional integration. For too long, most Arab countries have lived with their backs turned to each other. Closed borders and a lack of transport and communications infrastructure are an anachronism in our globalized world. Only by opening borders and allowing free movement of people, goods and capital can the region make a breakthrough to peace and prosperity. Let us hope that the popular revolts of the Arab Spring will bring the peoples of the Arab world peace, security, and a better life. Transition processes are exclusively upward curves, but sometimes rather bumpy roads. If the political will and support of the population for the road is ahead, of course, occasional setbacks will not divert the direction of the charted course. What is most needed is commitment to the common objectives, patience, and stamina. We also hope that the democratically elected governments can fulfill the expectations of their people by leading their societies towards the rule of law, full political participation of the citizens, social justice, and a wide range of opportunities for the young generation to shape their own future. The first real litmus tests in that sense will be in 4 or 5 years, when the next round of elections will be due. Only then we will see if election results are respected by all political forces and the change in government, if so decided by the people, becomes really possible. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, indeed, thank you very much, Mr. Vice-Chancellor, for a very masterly tour d'horizon, which I think has got our panel off to an excellent start. Let me now briefly introduce the other members of the panel, in case there is anybody here who has been confined in a windowless and televisionless room for the last 20 years and has not heard of these distinguished people. 40 years. 40 years in some cases. On my left is Bernard Kouchner, the founder of Médecins Sans Frontières, who has held umpteen portfolios in different French governments, who is credited with inventing the devoir d'ingérence, duty to interfere, which has more recently become known as the responsibility to protect, and who was, of course, the foreign minister of France until 2010. From 2006 to 2010. Right?
2007.
Sorry, yes.
Sorry for you.
And then beyond him, my good friend Prince Zaid Rad Al Hussein. He's served as a peacekeeper in Bosnia He has been, now he is for the second time, the ambassador of his country, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, to the United Nations. In between, he was ambassador in Washington. When I was in New York working with Kofi Annan, we always knew him as one of the most constructive and supportive ambassadors, particularly in questions to do with international criminal justice, where he was the first chair of the Assembly of States Parties of the International Criminal Court, and also to do with peacekeeping and the role of the contributing countries, which was sometimes a very awkward subject indeed because of the behavior, unfortunately, of some UN peacekeepers in different parts of the world. As you can see, or you may think you can see, he is fresh from the battlefront. We're not sure whether he was fighting demonstrators in the main square of Amman, or perhaps standing up for Jordan against its enemies in the streets of New York. No, actually, it was in the bus last night. He hit his head on a superfluous television screen in the front of the... But he's had a CAT scan, and we are assured that he is in good health and will be able to speak coherently. Then beyond, of course, you have President Terje Rød-Larsen, who is already known to everybody. He's the president of this wonderful institute, and he was on a previous panel yesterday, and he is the master of ceremonies of the whole thing. And on the other side, probably least needing introduction in this city above all, Dr. Mohamed El-Baradei, for many years the very distinguished and indeed Nobel Prize winning executive director of the IAEA. It's surely one of the world's leading experts on nuclear non-proliferation. When his term came to an end here, he went back to Egypt and courageously stood up to the plans that the Vice Chancellor referred to, that President Mubarak had for his succession. And we've talked a lot about triggers and what started the Arab Spring, but I think that one shouldn't certainly neglect the role that Dr. El-Baradei played in that situation. Some of us hoped that he might be the first properly elected president of Egypt. He decided in the end not to stand, but we are all, I think, on tenterhooks to hear his analysis of the situation and the prospects now that it's actually the second day of the first ballot of the presidential election in Egypt. And last but certainly not least, Yossi Beilin, who again has held many different portfolios in different Israeli governments, different from each other, but I have to say also rather different from the present Israeli government, and who, with Terje and with Nabil, who we heard in the previous panel, was one of the main architects of the Oslo Agreement, one of the most stalwart upholders of the cause of a peace based on reasonable compromise between Israelis and Palestinians. So I think that we talked in the last panel about the impact of the Arab Spring on the peace process. I think we will all be very interested to hear Yossi Beilin's take on that. So let me first ask Bernard Kouchner. France, I think, was the leader of Europe in engaging with the Arab world since the days of General de Gaulle. How do you see the trans-Mediterranean relationship in the light of these very new and exciting developments of the last year and a half?
Very easy question. So, yes, we are all here, either diplomats or old warrior of peace. So we met regularly with you, since, I told you, around 40 years. And as you said, Nabil Shah, we have to meet again. So I'm a bit schizophrenic, or I became schizophrenic. Sometimes I believe that this is so difficult. We know everything. We certainly are able, all of us, to describe the condition the different condition of different and various countries, because Arab Spring was made of very different countries with very different reasons, but one was underlined this morning, poverty. That's very true. It is not to say that it was a completely internal problem, but it was also internal problems. And so we are able to characterize or to try to define the position of this various countries, if I'm starting by Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, etc., etc. And they are not the same, and they were not fighting for exactly the same reason. And if I'm coming back to Morocco, Algeria, you notice that Algeria was a bit not only skeptical, but firm or calm or quiet, I don't know, but well, it was the same thing for all the oily or the oil countries. And when they were not calm, it was Bahrain. The rest of the world maintained strongly and with police and army the calm. So the big difference is also between poverty and all the countries producing oil. And we can say that it will be the same for some coming years. And we can say that, yes, it is a geopolitical difference in between Iran and Morocco, in between Saudi Arabia and Qatar, etc. But religion is playing a role. You cannot say the contrary. And taking the lesson of the last 2 centuries in Europe, you notice that it was faith, power, and battle. So it's always the same, also partly, but significantly in Middle East. And referring to Afghanistan or to Iraq is not enough. It's part of the problem, and it was not part of the solution, that's true. But this is my first part of schizophrenia. So what is going to change with Arab Spring? Not the basic producing oil, producing poverty, producing a lot of trouble all around. And the other part, the sunny part, is we have to fight again. We have to come back all together with new people, and the new people might come from the Arab Spring. Because the youth was involved. Because all these people, even if they reacted not the same way and not in the same, let's say, basic terms in their country, they represent an historical movement. That's for sure. Nothing will come back to the same situation. Nothing. And you know, there is how to characterize or to define an historical moment, partly when the experts were not aware. So we were not aware, and I was listening to my friend Michael, Mr. Vice-Chancellor, sorry. Yes, we knew that they were under dictatorship, but it was our dictatorship. It was our dictators, and we were benefiting of the relation we had, mainly with the producer of oil, but not only. And so we feigned to be surprised, and we were surprised. So how can they be confident with our support? And I was listening to the representative of the External Service of Europe this morning. Okay, we're still giving a lot of money, but when it was, remember that, Michael, we were able to produce a real 27 countries statement in agreement to be part of the setting up of a Palestinian state close to Israel, and etc., etc. But something is important, that is my first point. When Europe was ready, and it was under the last presidency of the Swedish presidency, you remember that, we were 27, it was the first time, and certainly the only one, where we are absolutely, on the paper, absolutely in agreement. But in that time, meanwhile, I mean, America was not with us. And it was so difficult to convince our American friends that with Europe it should have been a bit easier, and it has never been done. I don't want to come back to the vision, the American vision of Europe, certainly not now. But, well, it was a big failure in our strategy. America was out when we were in agreement. When we were not in agreement, we tried to be with America. It was impossible. Second point, what is necessary now to do? I don't know, because we are facing an unknown world. Well, we certainly, we can see the coming back of sort of democracy, very difficult, country after country, very difficult inside. There is also a way to appreciate the coming of democracy. This is the women condition. And the women condition is not so much in favor of Arab Spring for the time being. I do regret to say so. And so we are absolutely ready to restart a peace process. But I'm coming to my third and, let's say, desperate vision. Because when Nabil Shah this morning expressed the Palestinian view on the actual Israeli government, I was in agreement. Sometimes I believe that they don't want peace. But when you are looking to the polls, they're all 70% Israeli people, they want peace. And they are in agreement with the Palestinian state. But in fact, when you are involved, being everyday peace fighters, you are becoming desperate because, in fact, nothing is advancing. And on the contrary, when there is a drop of glimpse of hope, poof, it's impossible. Why? Mysteriously, because, and I believe this is my third point, you were talking about Yossi Did, about Nabil Did, etc., a lot of us. We were supported by a popular movement in Israel. We were supported on both sides by a Palestinian movement. Don't want to come back to Hamas and PLO, etc., because you know everything about that. And this is not easy, and this is a very big complication, for sure. But we were supported, we believe, we felt in that time that we were supported by a popular movement in Israel, peace movement. And this is no longer true. And even when there was a very interesting Arab Spring was just coming after a sort of social movement in Israel, very important. And it was for social reasons inside Israel. But they didn't talk about peace. So honestly, I'm absolutely ready to once more find a way. And I want to but it's up to us. I mean, I'm completely sure that we'll be together on another podium talking about the eternal necessity of peace and the two states together. Palestinian state, Israeli state, security of Israel is becoming only with the Palestinian state, etc., etc. But I want to just to end, because otherwise with hours and hours we can talk, about what's going on now in Syria. Because, and you were to talk about the right to interfere, the responsibility to protect. Responsibility to protect, in my mind, and I don't want to be arrogant, but yes, we invented the French doctors, the duty to interfere and the right to interfere. But it was by prevention. It doesn't exist when it is always, and it is always too late. It's always too late. So for the first time, in a way, for Libya, we well, also to define who are we, but who were we? We tried to avoid the bloodbath in Benghazi, and that's for sure we did. Well, badly prepared. It was certainly not followed by, etc., etc. A big mistake sometimes, yes. But we were able to prevent that bombing of Benghazi. And then after Syria, we were not able to do anything. So the people are not understanding, even if they know that Syria is in the middle of Hezbollah and Iran. And this is much more important than everything. Do we want, in preventing some bloodbath, another bloodbath? Because, well, you know, it's always the case we say about Syria, we don't want the civil war to come. But what is going on now there? This is a civil war already. It could be worse, of course, but this is already a civil war. So the people, this is difficult to explain to the people that on one side, as is what easier, we intervene in Libya, and it's impossible in Syria. And it is impossible, more or less. Otherwise, it's a big war, and certainly not only regional war. So what are we able to do for that? Starting or restarting a peace process. I think that we are a bit inert facing Kofi Annan initiative. Because either we don't believe in it, we cannot not trust this sort of final and desperate movement. But I think that we are wrong. We have to support that. And to support is certainly to be politically civil society, not only professional, involved in a peace talk. We have, and they have, to talk to their enemies. This is the only way to end the war. And this is not visible for the time being. There is no support for a conference, even a conference with civil society, with the people in charge. I mean, Torje, I mean, Marti Atisari, and all the others, and Carter, etc. Why not? Why aren't we pushing in that direction? Easy to say. So, sorry about my schizophrenic view. This is desperate on one side. There is no way. They don't want a Palestinian. I mean, the actual Israeli government doesn't want a Palestinian state. They want this idea of a unique state mixed with, etc. They are not ready to advance. And on the other side, I believe that Arab Spring is a good reason to restart a real peace process. And we certainly will be surprised by the attitude of the youngsters, the young people. They are not so much, they are certainly interested of setting up a Palestinian state, but they are not interested in going to war, another war, certainly not. And that this is very encouraging. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And you said that women's development is women's condition is not a good advertisement for the Arab Spring in the present so far. Looking around this panel, I'm a little bit worried about the IPI, and I should reassure you that yesterday we had Robin Wright up here, we had Alia El Badini up here, and it was exciting and encouraging, and I'm sure we will hear from ladies in the body of the Kirk later on. Meanwhile, let me turn to Yossi Beilin, and we've heard several rather pessimistic views of the peace process. In the course of this morning, we heard an optimistic one from Nabil. As you, as one of the architects of the peace process, what do you feel?
Well, I believe that the most important thing, speaking about the Arab Spring, which refers to the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, the non-existent one, is that there is an empowerment of the public opinion. People matter. It is not that in the past there was no public opinion and that it did not matter at all. But the significance, the salience of public opinion was much lower. Leaders would say, you know, I can bring 90% of my people to whatever step. They were boasting about their ability to mobilize their own people, perhaps because of their own ignorance about it. Now, today, when it is quite obvious that the public opinion does matter, and apparently will matter, the need for the leaders to take into consideration their public opinions will be much higher. Now, speaking about the Arab public opinion, the Israeli-Palestinian issue may not be something which prevents people from sleeping at night necessarily. But this is a kind of a common denominator. It is quite easy for people to motivate others by using the Palestinian problem as a convening problem, as something which will unite our neighbors in order to promote the peace process. And this is why, if I'm thinking a little bit artificially, I must admit, but if I'm thinking about what can be the positive fruit of the Arab Spring vis-a-vis the Israeli-Palestinian problem, it might make it much more salient than before. And as a result of it, the Arab leaders might lobby in the United States, in Europe, which are sleeping, both. I mean, Europe is totally paralyzed. The quartet is a joke, is a bad joke. They are having resolutions from time to time. If it is the last resolution of the 27th, which was quoted here, or quartet resolutions, it is not even, I mean, people do not take notice of it. They don't take notes of it. Nothing. Sometimes I see, you know, I'm speaking with my friends, and they are saying, yes, next week we are having a meeting of the 27 or whatever, and I'm following it in the press to see whether it is mentioned. Sometimes it is not, and sometimes, you know, on page 7, something is mentioned. It has nothing to do with reality. So if there is a lobby, a new lobby, coming mainly from the Arab states, saying you must do something about it, because, you know, we are all firefighters. If, God forbid, there is no fire, why should the world deal now with the Middle East? It's against the instincts of the world. But if there is a kind of a push for that, and it might be, then I think that it might have a positive impact on the Americans first, which are playing the most important role here, and then the Europeans and the whole artificial structure, which is still called the quartet. But since we were asked about the general changes, the strategic changes as a result of the Arab Spring, first of all, I think that we are seeing here something which is far from being new. I mean, you have a very authoritative leadership, a nomenclatura, a group of people which are benefiting from this leadership, financially, powerly, whatever, and a public which is deprived, mainly of freedoms, human rights and whatever. Now, how do you keep this public? Either by threats or by bribing it, and sometimes by religious methods. God will be against you if you are against the king or against the dictator, or God forbid what. These are usually the methods. Now, what is happening is that there is a point in history, and it happened so many times, that the public says enough is enough. They are not too happy with being deprived, and they revolt against it. When does it happen? When you have a kind of a Spartacus, a very charismatic leader who is saying, we are deprived, we have to fight against the dictators or the authoritative leadership, or when there is an outside trigger. In our story, there were no charismatic leaders, but there were triggers, outside triggers, and it became a very interesting tide. And I agree 100% with you, Mr. Foreign Minister, that we have to wait 4 or 5 years before we say it is already democracy. We have to pray, if we want, that it is a democracy that they are democracies, but you have to see the second wave of elections. Now, what is happening to us? And this is what Alia said yesterday. Why didn't you come to me? I couldn't come to you because I went to Mubarak. Had I come to you, just imagine what would be the reaction. Now, we are there. The Vienna Congress of 1815, we are there because we did not invent something better rather than to legitimize the world in which we live. And the organization which is our umbrella, the UN, again, not because it is a bad organization, not because it wanted to keep dictators and they love cruel leaders, but because it said, you know, this is the world, what can we do? We have to talk to these people. And I'm thinking about the people here, some of them I know quite well, and about myself. How many times we met with leaders in this world that we said to ourselves, it's not true, it's not true, what are we doing? But we presented our countries. And we knew that this is, at that time, or generally speaking, was in the interest of the country. And we had to be very nice. We had lunches and dinners, and sometimes a folklore dance after dinner and things like this. And we sat adjacent to the dictator, and we applauded. You know, this is what we did. And we did not invent something better than that. And this is what brings me to the, I believe, more important conclusion. We were not surprised. We were just surprised by the date, not by the phenomenon. The question was always when it would happen. And I'm telling you now, in 2 years, or in 1 year, or in 3 years, we will sit here talking about the elephant in the room, and the elephant in the room is China. Don't we know this? It is Chatham House. Don't we know this? You see what is happening there with human rights, with so many things. And we go there, including your humble servant, and we talk to the leadership, including your humble servant, and we are nice to them, and we have dinners, and we have lunches, and we know exactly what is happening there. How long will it take? How long? Few years until it happens. And don't then tell us that, how come you were surprised? We are not surprised. The only surprise is that it did not happen until now. This is the big surprise. Now, what can we do? If we are tied by the international organizations which cannot actually bridge the gap between the Assembly, the General Assembly, and the ICC. Because the UN can, or the international community can say, we are the ICC, you have to be brought to a court. But until then, what are you going to do with Bashir? What are you going to do with these people? Don't talk to them. They don't represent their countries. They don't have their interests. You don't have their interests. So the international organization did not find the bridge between the ICC and the General Assembly. Maybe there is no such a bridge. So at least when there is such an Arab Spring, the question is whether the international organizations, and mainly the UN, which is the most important, with all its flaws, it is the most important of them, and thanks heaven we have it, should save this spring. I mean, the claims now don't help us. We don't need the world. We can do it ourselves. You cannot do it yourself. The challenges in front of you are crazy, crazy. To invent a constitution, to create a parliament, to create a government, to have elections, and to deal with education, with the economy. You cannot do it yourself, neither in Egypt, nor in Tunisia, nowhere. The question, in my view, speaking about the strategic ramifications of the Arab Spring, before we are dealing with the ramifications, we have to deal with the preservation of the unique results of this wave. I do not, by the way, I do not subscribe to the idea that it is irreversible. It is reversible. You know, I've listened in my lifetime to so many things, including the peace process. After Oslo, they told us it is irreversible. It is reversible, regretfully. And I can tell you the Arab Spring is reversible. If we, as an international community, maybe Israel is in a problematic situation here, so exclude my membership here. But as a world, we have to save the Arab Spring, and then I believe that all of us, as human beings, as nations, will benefit from it.
Well, thank you very much. And I think actually this makes an excellent segue into Dr. Alvarade's remarks, because he will tell us whether it's reversible or not.
Thank you, Ed, for the easy question. Well, let me, just giving the time, look at the big picture. What happened in the Arab world is the so-called Arab Spring, and we hope to keep it Arab Spring, which also answers partly your question, is that we need to see how we can manage it. The Arab Spring was no surprise. At least to me and many people who come from this region. It was not a question whether, it was a question how. For many, many years, our friends in the West, and even part of the elite in the Arab world, have been saying that we are not ready for democracy, and we're comfortable going along, dealing with dictator, as Bernard was saying. It was obvious that the Arab population, the 400 billion Arabs, are no different breed. What happened is people finally decided that, that they need to catch up with the rest of the world. They need to be empowered. They need to be free. They need to have some social justice. So it was only surprising with the intensity and the speed it came about. It was not really whether it was coming. It was definitely coming, and now, so in that sense, there is no going back because the culture of fear has been broken, and that's clearly is something which is not going to change. The youth of the Arab world, at least, knew their way to the streets, know their way about civil disobedience, demonstration, what have you, and they want a future, and they are not going to sacrifice their future. That is. It is not a linear, as Yossi is saying. We might go down and up, up and down, but it is, going in definitely will go in the direction of freedom, justice, social equity, what have you. My friend Michael Spindleger mentioned that, we have to wait for the next election, and probably that's true. We were a bit optimistic, maybe a bit naive, to think that, say in Egypt, after 60 years of total repression, things will move smoothly in 1 year. People, when you talk to people about democracy in Egypt, they have no idea what democracy is about. They heard about the concept. They never practiced democracy. What democracy means in terms of protecting the right of the minorities, what democracy means in terms of participation, about civil society. These are all things that they're learning. It's a nurturing process. The fact, there was one thing in common in the Arab world, which is lack of good governance, whatever you define that, lack of political participation, poverty, clearly, as Bernard mentioned. When you have in Egypt 42% at least live under $2 a day, when you have political repression, when you have corruption, when you have obscene gap between the rich and the poor, what do you get? You get violence, you get marginalization, you get extremism, and that manifested itself in so many different ways. It manifested itself in, sectarian violence, religious violence. To me, these are all expression of anger. It is not really deeply rooted ideological differences. People are angry, and that's what you see right now in Egypt. People are just coming out of 60 years of anger. They never been told how to dialogue. They never been told how to trust each other. They never been told how you can live together and reconcile your differences. So lots of people are talking. Nobody is listening, and it's a very chaotic situation, if you like, but it's a very understandable chaotic situation. People are asking me today, I mean, whom do you expect is going to be the next president? And the fact that I don't know, is in itself is a very significant, a very significant event. This is the first ever election in the Arab world I can recall, and I'm not getting any younger, that I have seen, when you do not know in advance, who is going to run. So in itself, we should not underestimate the fact that there is no going back, that we have put our first step on the path of democracy, but a lot of challenges ahead of us. In my view, the election in Egypt is not going to be the most crucial factor. The most crucial factor to me is how you get people to agree on the basic common values by which they are going to live together. Now the society is completely decimated. I mean, you have the so-called liberals, the Islamists, the Christian community, the youth who feel that the revolution has been robbed from them, and the average Joe who believe that he didn't get anything out of this revolution except the economic condition has been much worse and security has been lost. So the challenge is how do you get these people together? How do you make them understand that the only way to move forward is through dialogue, is through reconciling their differences, that there are basic values that you cannot negotiate, freedom of religion, of expression, of freedom from fear. I mean, these are basic values. You have to agree on these, and that's why I have always insisted that without a constitution, which is the basic law, you are, as somebody mentioned, you are running into a marriage without a contract. You don't know what the conditions, and you need, or today when you are electing a president that doesn't know his job description, it's obviously is not the greatest way to move. But we need the challenge, I think, and that's where I come also to both national and international role, is to get people to dialogue on the basic values, understand there are universal values that are not to be negotiated, and then move on later on. The second is of course, economic development. In my view, once you have economic development, lots of these esoteric discussions we see today about the identity of the state, the role of religion, will evaporate. I mean, people are really interested in having food on the table, having healthcare system, having a shelter above their head. And right now we are not focusing on these priorities. So we need to focus on the real priorities, the basic needs, the basic freedom. We need to see how we can get people to dialogue. Yes, we look at power and faith and war, but Bernard, we do not want to see the war. Maybe we should let us focus on power and faith, and they are all right, and you can negotiate, dialogue on this, and that is the challenge. It's a pity that the international community, who could have provided a lot of support, now has lost any trust in the Arab world. Frankly, the trust is almost zero. I mean, for good reason. I mean, they feel that they have been treated with double standard. They feel that they have been sacrificed at the altar of economic interest, dealing with dictators. They see the Palestinian issue, which again has been going on since 1945, and that's without a solution. So the idea of double standard is very much in everybody's mind. So people in the Arab world have been unfairly treated by their own leaders, and feel that they, rightly so also, that they're unfairly treated by the outside world. They wake up in the morning, they see who is being killed, people in Iraq, Afghanistan, Palestinian territory, everywhere. And when somebody tells them there is a conspiracy against the Arab world, against the world, Muslim world in general, it's easy to believe. So you need to change completely the environment. You need to somehow, and now I'm talking international community, you need to get people to feel that you really care for them as people, and not just from a geopolitical perspective. The international community, if Yossi is saying about the UN, and to me right now it's dysfunctional. If I'm a bit honest. The world has been so much globalized in every way. We know that we rely on each other in every single aspect, from arms control, communicable diseases, trade, and yet our institutions that manage the world
has been lagging behind, starting from the UN, G20, G8, EU. I mean, none of that is functioning right now, frankly, to understand that we need different institutions, we need different managements of our globalized world that focus on human security, as they call it, that focus on the individual, that focus on basic dignity, human rights. And again, we talked about a responsibility to protect, and it's a fantastic concept, you know. But look at what's happening in Syria right now. We keep wringing our hand. Look at what happened in Libya. Again, it was not the greatest outcome. You know, I mean, lots of civilians have lost their life burner in the process. You know, and there is a feeling that there was, you know, that NATO or the UN trespassed its mandate. As I said, there are issues, but I, for one, believe that this is a concept that absolutely has to be operationalized. You know, and I, for one, believe that we need to start and end with human dignity, human security. That's the only way to move toward peace in the process. So to end, we are on a long journey. We might have, you know, bumpy road, and we will have a bumpy road, but we are on the right direction. We need to make sure that the international community and both people within the countries provide the vision, provide the leadership, provide the trust that we manage this beautiful, you know, process of finally liberating 400 billion people from local, you know, these countries got independence from foreign forces, but they never really, people never got independent. You replaced the colonization by local dictators or local occupiers. So it is the first time now when we need to get people free, and it's only when you treat people as human beings, they will act as human beings. I mean, this is, for me, it's very simple. Give them what they need, they will act, you know, respecting our basic values, which again, if you talk about basic values, you know, I don't think there is any difference between Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, what have you. You know, they are all the same basic values, but you need to get to people to understand that this is the only way for their own salvation, is agree that there are inscrutable, you know, values that everybody needs to subscribe to, and that one of them is absolute basic freedoms, you know, and, you know, dignity. When people lose their dignity, they go berserk, and that's what we have seen in the Arab world lately. So I am optimistic in the medium to long run, but we have to brace ourselves for a very bumpy road.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Sadly, the Vice-Chancellor has to leave us now because he has another engagement in Munich. I don't know if you have any parting thoughts in light of what you've heard. No. No, all right. Well, we'll let you go, but we thank you again, both for your speech, which was full of important insights, and for the wonderful hospitality we've been enjoying throughout this seminar. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you. So now I turn to Prince Zaid, and I didn't warn him of this, so he may refuse to answer, but I'm tempted to ask him. We keep hearing about this issue of sectarian violence. Of course, we've seen it for a long time in Lebanon. We saw it in a terrible way in Iraq. We have seen a certain amount of it in Egypt, and we are all terrified that this is the turn that events are going to take in Syria. What is the answer to this? How can the Arabs deal with it? And is there anything that the outside, the rest of the world, can do to help avoid getting dragged into a sort of Sunni, Shia, or Christian, Muslim Armageddon in the Middle East?
Edward, you are the authority on this panel. You were not elected by us, you were appointed. In keeping with the exercise of the prevailing atmosphere of dissent, I will ignore your question entirely because you did provide us with a guide, and I'm going to stick to the guide, and at a later stage I will deal with this question. What I hope to do is just focus on 3 points with a certain amount of precision, And I haven't heard them being discussed in the last 3 days. But there are 3 points which I think will very much determine where we go from here. The first point relates to the Global Food Index. The latest report issued by the Food and Agricultural Organization placed the index, and as you know, this is a commodity, this is a basket of various commodities essential for humankind, placed the value at 214. This is down from a high of 235 points last year, but it's still very high when compared to where it was 3 years ago at 153 or 10 years ago at 90 points. So for those countries that have to import their foodstuffs at market prices, for those countries that do not have energy independence, for those countries, irrespective of whether you have an Islamist government, a reformist government, a monarchy, or a republic, you have to take account of this factor. It means, of course, in this climate, that you have to maintain either the subsidies that you have currently in place and put enormous pressure on your current account deficit, pushing it up to its very limit, where basically you risk, if you go beyond it, complete economic collapse, or you begin a phased withdrawal of the subsidies and risk social pyrotechnics of a sort that you do not want. That's the first point. The second shadow that's going to be cast is a shadow which draws from the 1848 experience. When we looked at that experience, of course, soaring food prices and food shortages played a role. But there was also a emerging underlying liberal philosophy. Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto was issued on the 1st of February 1848. Adam Smith had already published his Wealth of Nations. You had John Locke already publishing his work on property and rights. You had Thomas Paine already in the United States articulate the rights of man. You had Montesquieu already define the sort of space for how separation of powers was to exist. And so there was a vehicle, a philosophical vehicle underpinned by local philosophers. In the Arab world, we do not have the Arab equivalent of a Thomas Paine, of a John Locke, of a Montesquieu. We do not have it. And so what do we end up doing? We take the exuberance of people like Alia, brave, young people who are idealistic. We take that, and because we don't have an authentic channel of expression in philosophical terms, we embark on a journey of mimicry. We're looking to see who we can mimic. We look at Turkey and we think, this is what we should have, it's something like this. Or I was in Singapore 2 weeks ago and I was told that an Egyptian delegation visited Singapore recently and they wanted to be like Singapore. Of course, you have, I will pretend to ignore, of course, these leaps are not possible. These leaps are not possible. So the default position is Islam, because you have there, however you want to explain it, you have a political religious philosophy which where the message is universal, but the source is local. It's a locally sourced sort of philosophy, religion, esoteric in its own kind. And so the default position is always going to be that. The third prevailing influence, and this is something that Yossi mentioned, is the poverty in the state exercise over the use of force when it crosses into what is unlawful internationally. There is no more a lawful exercise over the use of force in all domains beyond what is accepted internationally. And this is perhaps the greatest lesson from the uprisings and the reaction to them. Governments that overspend on security for the sake of controlling populations, you can only do it so far. Once you cross the barrier between what enforcement is to what may be criminal behavior or construed as that by the international community, you're essentially ruined. And I think this is the lesson that in the long term we will grasp. The final point I wish to make is you didn't ask me about Jordan, and here I feel obliged to talk about it. I think for us, it is very clear that His Majesty is very determined to see the policy or process of reform through. It is difficult, there is no doubt about this, because you can see this in every region of the world. Governments can begin to innovate, and you will be motivated to innovate because there are those who will clamor for it. On the other hand, in all governments, there are those who will stand up against this. For every reformer, there are, as one philosopher said, 10,000 self-appointed guardians of the past. And that is also present in these countries that we have to take into account. In Jordan, we're committed. We have embarked on a rather ambitious project of reform, politically speaking. I can go into this in more detail. We do have pressures on us economically. As I mentioned earlier, the prices in terms of food and energy impose a heavy burden on us, and we have to play this balancing act between assisting our people, but also understanding that we can only go so far without the support of friendly and neighboring states. Finally, on your sectarian issue, I think the answer is read Amartya Sen's book, Violence and Identity, and he gives you the recipe for how it is we can avoid all of these issues. Basically, in one word, he says that we all have multiple identities in the modern world. We have to keep those multiple identities in balance. We don't attach an overarching value to one identity, be it religious or national, to the exclusion of everything else. If we can do that as human beings, we will have peace and harmony. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, it was very kind of you to answer my unscripted question as well as giving those very important insights. Mr. President, I turn to you. You've put us all on this platform, and yourself. I will leave you to decide humbly which of the many issues that have been raised you would like to address.
That was very generous of you. I think I will start with actually Nabil and Yossi. Nabil from the previous session, and that goes with the Middle East peace process. And I'll start by saying to you, Yossi, I agree with you. It is reversible. And what we did back in 1993, when it all started at an Indian restaurant in Tel Aviv, where Oslo was invented, is reversible. At that time, you and Nabil and the rest of us, we were radicals. We were doing something daring and dashing behind the backs of the superpower, the Americans, and in a way, we succeeded. We were radicals. Today, I'm conservative. The reason is that it is reversible. So what I think we have to do today is to preserve what was gained. That is the Palestinian Authority, the presidency, the cabinet, the ministries, because that we need that platform to achieve the goals in the future. And I do not believe that it is possible to achieve those goals today. It will happen, but not today, simply because the historical circumstances are not there. They were there in 1993. Why? Because the PLO misguidedly sided with Saddam Hussein in a war in Kuwait, which made all the remittances from the Gulf disappearing. Incidentally, at the same time, the Soviet Empire collapsed, and all the remittances and the political support for the PLO disappeared. This again led to frictions between the leadership in the West Bank and Gaza and the leadership in exile in Tunis. The PLO, Yasser Arafat, was desperate. He was looking for a solution. The first Intifada, Yossi, made your bosses at the time, Rabin and Peres, also desperate because Israel was losing the moral high ground in the international community. So there was a strong desire on both sides to move forward. The Americans were also misguided because they refused to speak to the PLO. They negotiated with local leaders who did not have the capacity to deliver. And these were the insights of Oslo. We started negotiating secretly with Israel and the PLO and Yasser Arafat. This made it all possible. Today, the historical circumstances are not there because neither of the parties have the motivation to move forward and resolve all the outstanding issues. This is why today we have to be conservative. And it's not only the Palestinian institutions. The peace with Jordan would not have been possible without Oslo. I believe that without the peace with Jordan and the Palestinians, the Israeli withdrawal from Lebanon in 2000 would not have been possible. And if that hadn't been done, the 25,000 Syrian troops which were pulled out of Lebanon a few years later would not have been possible. I mean, things have been achieved. We shouldn't forget that. And very much due to what Nabil has been doing over the two or three last decades, and Yossi and their colleagues. Today we have to preserve, because it's unrealistic. I think it's possible to move things forward, but not to achieve the end results today. And we tend to forget this, that sometimes it's actually important to be conservative, to protect what is there, because that is the platform for moving forward in the future. May I also go into the title of this part of the seminar? Actually, I think I invented the title, this Crisis of Expectations. And I think we have crisis of expectations today at several levels. One is identity, because I believe that there is a new identity, particularly amongst the young, and it's a global phenomenon. Because the world we are living in today, transformed demographically and by information technology, is so radically different from the society and the world that I lived in when I was young. And actually it's illustrated here. I think all of you, including myself, we have a little gadget in our pocket. I've been communicating during the previous seminar with my kids, my wife. I've sent SMSs and emails to 3 different continents. While I was sitting here.
You weren't listening to us?
But this is multiple identities, my friend. It's Amartya Sen. And I can also tell you, which is a new phenomenon. We are about 100 people in this audience. Do you know how many people are listening to what we are saying and watching us in New York right now? 2,000 people. It's webcast. It's a new world. I mean, it's a completely new way of living. Identity is new and is produced by demography and technology. And the point is that there's a discrepancy with the way we organize our societies and the new identities. And this is creating a crisis of expectations. The same goes for multilateral organizations. They are not capable of handling the situation in Syria. I mean, under international law, there's actually a duty to do it, as you pointed out yesterday. But the multilateral institutions are not able to do it. There's a discrepancy between the values of the self, so to speak, today, and our institutions, not only the states, but also the multilateral institutions. So this is one crisis of expectation. But there are several others. Let me just mention one other. And that is, let's go to Egypt. I mean, those who started the revolution in Egypt, they were liberals and social democrats who wanted the freedoms of 1848, actually. But when we look at the election results, this is not reflected. And in many ways, some might say that what we have today in Egypt is not a revolution, it was a revolt, but it ended in a military coup d'etat. You could argue that this is the case. And this will create a new crisis of expectation, which reflects what several of my colleagues here have said. And this is a very dangerous situation, because it can drive us to backlashes. And this is why I said at the opening of this seminar yesterday that what we need in the Middle East now is a regional institution with inbuilt incentives to all these countries in transition to move in the right direction against good governance and modernity. And this, in my opinion, would be at the top of my political agenda. So I have a radical agenda and I have a conservative agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Terje.
So we are 2 schizophrenic guys.
We're all schizophrenic and we all have multiple identities. But and I'm going to assume for a moment the identity of Nabil Shah, because if I don't say it, he will. It's all very well to talk about being conservative. Actually, we've heard this often before. Time isn't ripe, we can't solve all the problems, we need to let the parties come to terms and come back, at the right moment to the table. But meanwhile, the settlements process goes on. Time doesn't stand still. So conservatism, yes, but only if it's conservatism for everybody.
Conservatism is to preserve what is.
Right,
but
what is like the Palestinians still have some land.
Which is an imperative to stop the settlements.
Okay, but how do you do that without being radical?
I think actually Bernard is the best to answer this, because he's a socialist who served in a conservative government.
Yes, yes, but have you seen what began the rightist government without me? They felt.
Well, let me also then put to Dr. Albarade what you said about the military coup d'etat. Is that a fair description of what happened in Egypt last year?
I'm not sure that's exactly accurate, but that could be a perception. It was a revolution. I mean, you had 20 million people, who went to the street in peaceful way, looking for their freedom, looking for social justice. I mean, there is no question. Then they somehow trusted the military to manage the transition. The military obviously had different views of what revolution is all about. I mean, for them, revolution was just getting rid of Mubarak and some of his cronies. But in terms of mindset, in terms of approach, in terms of personalities, I mean, they wanted really the status quo. And they royally mismanaged the transition. I mean, you should have started with, obviously, with the constitution as any logical sequence. They haven't done that. They went dashing into an election. And again, when we see the result of the election, well, that in a way was expected. I mean, the parties, the post-revolution parties, were 6 months old, and they were competing with the Brotherhood, who have been 80 years on the ground. People lost their faith in the old political elite, and they wanted something different. And here comes, on a white horse, the so-called Islamists, saying we are coming with the banner of the identity that was left in Egypt, because people lost their identity with the state. See, when you can have multiple identity. You can be a Hispanic American, Black American, but you're still an American. In Egypt, people lost their identity with the state, and everybody find the only convenient identity is either being a Muslim or a Christian or Sunni or Shia. And they came with this identity to the election. And who would be able to fight people who are saying we are coming in the name of God to transform this wretched place after 60 years of repression. So the election obviously should have been delayed, as was to give the new parties time to do it. You should have started by getting people together through the constitution, through agreeing on the basic values. And the result, as I said, is a mess. As I mentioned in one of my latest tweets, it's total mess, even with the election of a new president. And we just have to hope for the best. But certainly there is the army that lost a lot of support, tremendous support among the people. I mean, they started with people saying, you are our saviors. In a way, now people just cannot wait to get the army out of the way. But the army is afraid. The army wants to maintain its perks. The young people feeling that the revolution has been robbed from them, and you're right, they have not had no ideology that they want to have, future, jobs, opportunities, equality, freedoms, what have you. Lots of people now believe that the revolution was really a bad thing. The average person who, because he lost his job, he doesn't have security when he goes or she goes home. Women still, and I mentioned that, continue to be completely marginalized. If you look at the new parliament, you have 11, I think, 11 women out of 500 something members. You have 8 Copts or Christians out of 500 something. I tweeted on the French model, Bernard, a couple of days ago, when you have 17 ministers who are women, and 3 of them are again from Arab background. And I said, we have a long way to go, because democracy is not just a majority. Democracy at at its essence at least, is everybody feel represented in whatever political system. So there's a lot of challenges, but again, we are starting from scratch. We have no idea what democracy is about. We need to learn, but we need to manage it in a peaceful way, and the sooner we manage it in a way that everybody feel that he can belong, identified with the country. And the moment I see less people emigrating, the talents that are emigrating, which is a big worry to me, you know, the more I feel, because you need these people to build this country. And again, I end by saying, it's not being an Egyptian, but Egypt with 90 million people has been, a center of the Arab world. If Egypt were to do it right and present a model of a modern and moderate state, it would be the locomotive of evolution in the Arab world through an evolutionary process and not through the explosion that we have seen in Libya and we're seeing in Syria.
Thank you very much. It seems to me that throughout these wonderful 2 days, we have heard a great deal about the United States. We haven't really heard from the United States, except for Robin, who I think really belongs to the world and not just to America. But Ambassador Echo has been sitting there very patiently and quietly listening to all this, and I really feel that he should at least be given the opportunity to say a few words.
Well, I would have to say I've enjoyed this a great deal. And in a sense, it's left me with a sense of optimism and rather than pessimism, because obviously our perspective has been in watching the Arab Spring that we support the aspirations of people everywhere to self-governance. We ourselves were the product of a revolution, and so it's been an encouraging thing to see and a healthy thing to see, and obviously we want to see it unfold in a peaceful way. And we want authorities everywhere to recognize that they need to respond to the aspirations of people. As to the impact on the Middle East and the peace process, I frankly kind of agree that there is an opportunity that flows from this to recognize that when you don't respond to the aspirations of people, you put yourself at risk. And therefore, the parties who want to see peace in the Middle East need to recognize, and who don't, people need to recognize that the people would like to see peace on both sides. I think that is still the case. So how will that happen? I'm left with a little bit of encouragement in the sense that if, Hamas truly, in a reconciliation government, renounces violence, recognizes Israel's right to exist, and is willing to support a two-state solution, in effect becomes more of a secular, responsible organization, that would be a very positive step forward. And then you would truly have a party to negotiate with that represents all the Palestinians, rather than to say, well, I could forge an agreement with part of the Palestinians, but where would the others be? At the same time, we see a new political reality unfolding in Israel, where Mr. Netanyahu has a very large majority in the parliament, and perhaps has the political capital there to go further than he's gone in the past towards a peace agreement. So we may see in that sense, things unfold in a way that would be encouraging towards a peace agreement. Our frustration in the U.S. has been that it takes the two parties have to agree. The two parties have to both want peace, and we can't force them to. So they have to see that it is in their best interest and that it is the best course for them to follow. Our hope would be that that goes forward. And I think that would be true regardless of the outcome of our presidential election this year. I think that any American president would love to see, regardless of political party, would love to see peace in the Middle East, and would hope that we would capitalize on any opportunity to help make that happen. Obviously, it's difficult in the midst of an election campaign, but we do have a very capable representative, David Hale, who knows the history and knows the people and is doing everything he can to facilitate moving towards an agreement. These things don't happen overnight. But I'm left from this with a little bit of, frankly,
encouragement. Perhaps it's naivete, or perhaps it's my natural optimism. As an American, we tend to be optimistic. But you never know. It's always better to be a little optimistic than cynical, I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, we only have very few minutes left, so I want to give other people the opportunity from the floor. Robin, yes.
My name is Robin Wright. I have a question for Mohammed El-Baradei. You may not be able to predict who the next president is, but could you reflect for us on the difference of what happens in Egypt next between a secular candidate winning and an Islamist candidate winning, particularly in defining the new order?
Well, I'm not sure, frankly, that going through the list of the candidates, that it will make a hell of a difference, because you are going to have to work primarily, whoever is going to be elected, with the parliament. It's a parliament who's going to chart the vision of the country through enacting laws for the next 40 years. You need to make sure that you reach out, whoever is going to win, he reach out to the so-called liberals. They are the one who have the know-how, they are the one who are needed to get the economy, which is in shambles, jump-started. You have to reach out to the youth who triggered that uprising revolution, because they are 60% of the Egyptians who are under 30. So whoever is going to be, elected, has to reach out if he wants to succeed. But he has, as I said, it's still yet to be defined how much the power of the president, whether we're going to have a parliamentary system or a presidential system, with a huge difference in that. The key, at least, is hopefully to have somebody with a vision, to feel that the country needs to be united, that you need somebody who get everybody together and tell them about the art of compromising, tell them about everybody is going to lose if they don't work together. Obviously, hopefully, you will get somebody who is more middle of, more centrist, if you like, But as I said, giving up the whole chaos about the current institutions we have, about the current, decimation of society, it will not make much difference other than you need somebody who is appealing to the bulk of the Egyptians. And the bulk of the Egyptians, as I said, I believe, are people who are keen to be free and to live in dignity. So this is a step on the road. I don't think you will, well, again, if you get somebody who is representative of the past regime, I mean, that could be, the beginning of a second wave of revolt. I mean, that has to be clear. I mean, people would feel terribly, that they have lost or they have been robbed of the revolution. I mean, I'm talking at least about the young people, that they need to see a new face, they need to see somebody whom they can identify with, and they need to see somebody who is able to cater to their basic needs and not continue to speak about, as I said, esoteric stuff that are not in any way priorities for us. What is the identity of Egypt has been there for 7,000 years. I think to talk about Egypt identity is an oxymoron, frankly.
And I guess you're not going to tell us who you voted for.
I haven't voted.
Oh.
I decided not to vote because you cannot vote for a president who doesn't know, as I said, what is his powers. You do not vote when you have an article in the interim constitution that say you cannot appeal any decision that is being taken by the electoral committee. So I'm a lawyer, so I care about these things.
Yes, very good. Yossi.
Just if I may beg to differ. First of all, I believe that it is a sea change. It's a huge difference if it is a secular president or a member of or former member of the Muslim Brothers. The view of the world towards Egypt will be different. He is a role model, and people will look at him in a different way. Whatever the Constitution decides about his authorities, he will be the most important person in Egypt in the future. And this is why, speaking also about the Arab Spring in other countries, the identity of the president is very, very important. I'm sorry that you are not a candidate, and I'm sorry that you didn't vote, because your vote would have been very important.
Well, Yossi, again, I would not really disagree with you, but I would agree with you if we know that this is a presidential system, that the president will have the power, to be the face of Egypt. If you end up with a parliamentary system and you have a ceremonial president, it's not really going to matter much.
But you will not have a ceremonial president. You know it.
Well,
it will not be a ceremonial.
It's not sure. I mean, it's not really sure. I mean, there's a lot of people, including the Brotherhood, who believe that we should go into a parliamentary system, because if they don't win, if their candidate doesn't win the election, they would like to go into a parliamentary system. So, again, these are all questions that need to be, again, on the question of the Brotherhood. There's a lot of there's a lot of extremist views that can be heard, but at least in their dealing with the international community, in their dealing with the US, for example, they have been meeting everybody, right, left and center, from Congress, from the government. I think, and they made it very clear that, I mean, they would like to have, Islamic background in terms of a role model, but they're not going to get into who is going to dress what or eat or what have you. So I'm sure if he were to come to power, by necessity, he will have to compromise or exactly do things quite different than what he used to write. Something
by definition.
Something like John Bolton used to, but it's, again, I mean, I disagree with you that having a face of a liberal, of a president will send a good message to the rest of the world. I mean, I have no disagreement on that.
Bernard, would you like to say something? Oh, okay.
Yes, I like to say that compared to what we have done since at least some years, this is a better situation in the Arab world. I don't know if it's a better situation in Israel. I doubt. And this is something very strange to see the reverse. And I was talking, sorry, but because it's a reminding of my socialism, my dear. But I'm talking about the popular movement. The popular movement had changed. There is a popular movement in the Arab world, not all over, but in the Arab world, and there is no, or not enough, a popular movement in Israel. So it doesn't mean that we have to stay inert, not at all. On the contrary, I believe that this historical movement, and I do regret that Israel didn't see this historical movement, in the Arab world, this is very important.
I might say just one thing on Israel, actually, since you used it. I mean, we are, if you talk really regional peace and security, we are going to have a serious issue, because, if you look at a democratic Egypt, there is at least 95% of the Egyptian population are in total anger with Israel. You see, that's quite a different situation. Any president who is coming, you see, is going to be under tremendous pressure, even to look into revisit the peace agreement, whatever that means. It doesn't really have a meaningful peace anyway. But there is going to be a major issue unless, in my view, the entire community, the Israel, the Americans, of course, adjust their policy, understand the depths of anger in the Arab world, and now you cannot just have peace with a dictator. It's really the people who are going to be empowered and to dictate the policy. But at the same time, it's a fantastic opportunity if we are able to have peace, because then finally you'll have peace with the people and not with Mr. Mubarak or another ex-president or dictator.
Thank you. Zaid, do you want a last word?
No.
You sure?
I'm sure.
Okay. In that case, I turn it over to our president to do the honors.
On the substance, I think what is important to keep in mind here is that whatever happens, this is going to be a roller coaster with unexpected twists and turns. So I think we all have to put on our safety belts. When I say all, I mean, I'm also referring to that actually, as I pointed out yesterday, these conflicts are the only conflicts on the globe which are both local, regional, and global. I mean, development aid to the Middle East today is not benevolence from those countries who are giving, it's self-interest. If if it's linked to political development, because there is a common interest globally that this goes well. Because if it goes bad, it's going to hit us all, politically, economically, culturally, and fundamentally. So there is a common interest here, and this is why this dialogue is so important to continue to have. With these words, I'd like to say thank you, first and foremost, to our hosts, the Ministry for Defense and the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, to General Pucha and his colleagues, to Valerie and your colleagues, to IPI staff here in Vienna, first and foremost Andrea and Walter and Joanna and all the other staff members who've been so incredibly helpful in order to make this, I think, a successful seminar. And at last, of course, to all participants and panelists, I think this has been terrific. Thank you very much. So, gute Reise und see you next year.